that no matter what happens in life, you always have to learn how to navigate. And no matter what happens, you can always turn every liability into an asset. So I don't see this as a major thing. It's just that it's a little embarrassing that you announce it and a lot of people are supposed to be watching this. Anyway, what's the story with the sound? No sound. Okay, so scratch all that. So good evening, everyone. And good Yom Tov. It's a Yom Tov because the mere fact that we're sitting here in Palo Alto, in this beautiful Chabad center, Rabbi and Rebbe Levin, who I know from many, many years ago, they wouldn't be here were it not for this day in history. Today is the 72nd anniversary of the Lubavitcher Rebbe's ascension and assuming the leadership of Chabad, which in turn created a revolution of literally now thousands and thousands of emissaries, shluchim as they're called, and shluchot, all over the world. So I think it's important to just acknowledge that on this day, the 10th of Shevat, 1950, was when the sixth Chabad Rebbe passed away, and his son-in-law assumed the leadership. On a personal note, I don't think I'd be the person I am today, and I wouldn't be standing here speaking were it not for this great mentor and Rebbe. So this day is quite significant in that sense, and one of the most beautiful things is expressing gratitude and appreciation for those that have helped shape your life, in many ways help you find your soul and your purpose and mission in life. I want to thank, of course, good friend, birthday boy. Yeah, still a boy compared to my age. Isaac or Yitzchak Wiener and his dear wife. Today is his birthday. So I want to wish you a happy birthday. And this all evolved from that. He asked me to come on a Zoom for his birthday. And the Zoom ended up where we have today. And so thank you for making this happen. Thank you all for coming out this beautiful evening. But that said, I grew up in Crown Heights. So I was born and bred, and grew up in a very traditional, what the New York Times may call ultra-Orthodox. They won't call it a cult, they'll call it a sect. I think legal reasons. I went to the Chabad school system, and that's where I grew up. However, in my particular case, my home was completely non-dogmatic. My father was a journalist. My mother, maybe she'd be well, many long years. Very open-minded home. Was never silenced. Didn't experience what many people experience sometimes in religious environments. So for me, it was a very interesting combination. Being naturally a skeptic, it worked well because it wasn't imposed upon me. And my approach always has been, from my youngest age, was not just to take things for granted. In other words, just because you grew up in a particular home, everyone here has your life. You have your homes, you have your culture. And most of us are just a product. I don't want to call it a victim of circumstances, but definitely a product of circumstances. And I don't know how often people challenge those givens that you grow up with. Many of us don't like to rock the boat. And when you do, there are sometimes prices to be paid in every community, in every culture. What I discovered, and what I think is a tribute to this day that we're honoring, that you can have very deep religious beliefs, and it doesn't have to be conformist or dogmatic or condescending and all the other negative imagery that comes often with religion and faith. And that actually can allow you to access your deepest resources and really become the best as an individual you can be. Now, most people don't associate individuality with religion. Religion seems to demand conformity, tradition, rituals. But the fact is, as I'll try to convey, that the very opposite is true. And when you discover that, it could actually change your entire life. So they tell this story, I think it's a good way to capture the contrast. Lucy comes home from school and she's studying biology, the origin of our species, where do we come from? She's all confused because there's so many different theories. She comes home, she asks her mother, so where do we come from? And her mother breaks out into a warm smile and says, sit down, let me share with you. We had a grandmother that came from a little town in Poland, and a grandfather in a city in Czechoslovakia. A few generations back, great-grandfather was a major scholar and composed an important work in Jewish law. And the further back we go, the better it gets, all the way back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, patriarchs and matriarchs, all the way to Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve. It's all a tremendous yichus, pedigree. Okay, when her father comes home, she asks him the same question. And in stark contrast to her mother, the father gets into a very serious mode, disturbed. Says he always rued this day. Brace yourself, he tells Lucy, and he begins to share with her that we originate millions of years back to apes. And before that, amphibians. And before that to 1 or 2 cell bacteria, all the way back to a ball of gas. That's as far as we figured out so far. So you could imagine these 2 different answers that she got from her mother and her father. So she runs back to her mother and says, Ma, I don't understand. You and Dad seem to get along, but your answer about the origin of species is very different. And her mother responds with a smile and says, yeah, we both told you the truth. Your father told you about his side of the family. And I told you about my side of the family, you know. So there you have it. Maybe this is it, the reconciliation between evolution and creationism is just a matter of which side of the family. Now, beyond the joke, it actually does capture 2 perspectives on human beings and on life in general. Whether we are beasts, like all other beasts in the wild, but we've learned to develop some for coexistence purposes, red lights, green lights, in Freudian language, an ego and a superego, but the id remains the driving force of what defines a human being. Essentially a selfish, pleasure-seeking creature. Or are we fundamentally, in the words of the Bible and the Torah, created in the divine image, and that's our essential nature. Nobility, selflessness, kindness, virtue. And yes, we have another voice. And if you've learned Tanya, it talks about the 2 souls, the 2 voices. One, this voice of survival, about me, and the other is the transcendent voice. And it is a battle. And what really lies at the heart, the essence of a person, is not the id, but the yid, Y-I-D. So Freud got it partially right, but he didn't dig deep enough. Maybe he had issues with his mother or whatever it may be. And there's a pin to the yid, there's a spark. So it's true, we all know we can be at our worst and we can be at our best. And that the essence of a person is actually fundamentally divine. and yes, infinite even. And in many ways, this is a central theme of Judaism in general, and specifically Hasidus, and particularly the theme of the first Hasidic discourse delivered by the Rebbe in 1951, taking off where his father-in-law ended, called Basi Legani, come to my garden. And just that word, garden, tells you everything. That the world is really a garden that got trapped in a jungle. Or if you think of it in the words of Michelangelo, when he was once asked, how do you carve those beautiful angels in the marble? And he responded, I see the angels trapped in the marble, and I carved and set them free. You hear that? It's not something you have to acquire. It's right there in you, within you. But sometimes it's trapped in marble or concrete or other substances. It's a very different perspective on life. And you tell me, I mean, almost everybody in this earth goes to therapy. Maybe this community doesn't. Everybody's seeking, trying to deal with their issues. And if you have a therapist or a mentor or a guide or a friend that doesn't really believe in you and actually sees you that you're really at heart a selfish creature, a selfish animal, so how much can you really expect from someone like that? Yes, we can expect, try to behave, behavioral change, and so on. But if you have someone in your life that believes in you, that you're an angel at heart, at soul, that's your essential being, and that really you are a garden with flowers and beauty of all sorts, and sometimes it gets trapped. That's part of life. It's a whole different attitude of how we grow. There's a level of confidence. There's something to hope for. And this, when you come to realize it, it's not just a gift, it changes the whole perspective of how you look at life. And I'll connect, since it's your birthday, and we all have birthdays, everybody has a birthday, right? Anybody here doesn't have a birthday? So my book, Toward a Meaningful Life, I quote in the chapter on birth. It's a theme that I heard very often from the Rebbe, that we all heard. I paraphrased it. Birth is God saying, you matter. Birth is God saying, you matter. The very, very fact that you were born is a divine vote of confidence. You're not here by accident. It's not random or arbitrary. You are needed. And you and only you can accomplish what you need to accomplish in this world. When as a teenager I was struggling and trying to understand what I'm doing with my life, and the Judaism that I grew up with is something where can I really embrace it and own it, not just to satisfy my parents and grandparents. It was when I heard that statement, and it was on a Yud Shvat, on the 10th of Shvat, in the early 70s, as a young teenager, this point that you are absolutely needed. And it wasn't about an ego trip. It was the exact opposite. It was the feeling of responsibility, that you have something to accomplish. You know, when a young person hears that, that's what you want. I mean, I realized that I was like a rebel without a cause, and now I realize there is a cause. How many of our young people, or think of yourselves when you were a little younger, did you ever get that message? Most of us don't get that message. There are 8 billion people on this planet, and how many of them can answer this question? What is the personal mission statement of your life? Most people do not have an answer to that question, and what's even worse, they don't even know there is a question like that. And I've asked, I can't say I've asked 8 billion people, but I've asked enough. And it's not because of anyone's fault. No one ever taught us that. Business 101, you can't have a company without a mission statement. You must have a mission. Because the mission drives the entity, its focus, its purpose. Without it, you can't have efficiency. There's no cohesiveness. And especially when you have many different people working at something, they need to have something that binds them together. Some hub that connects all the spokes. But then if someone asks you, if a business can't function without a mission, how can you? So most people say, yeah, I have a mission, to be happy, to make money, to bring up a healthy family. And if it's maybe a Jewish person will say to bring up a good Jewish family. Those are all beautiful things, but they don't qualify as a mission statement. That would be like a company saying our mission is to make money or have happy employees. Every company is supposed to do that. It has to be unique to this company, has to be short, and it has to be actionable, it has to be doable. So if I could say it in simple English, this day, Yud Shevat, in 1950 and 51, before I was born, the Rebbe declared that this generation in general, and each individual, each one of us, men, women, and children, have a unique, indispensable mission to fulfill. And you have all the resources you need to realize it. That alone, just that statement, even if you don't even know what that actual mission is life-changing. I remember it was right after the Rebbe's passing in 1994. So I don't know if you can mention him these days, but I'll mention his name, and if you all think it's not appropriate, we'll erase it from the recording. So I was interviewed that night by, actually it was 2 days after the Rebbe's passing, 1994, by Charlie Rose and by Larry King. So Charlie Rose asked me the question. It was a live interview. It was on the spot. He said to me, so you sat at the feet of this great man. You worked for him. Isaac mentioned before, that was the work I did for many years, remembering and absorbing and recreating and then publishing the Rebbe's words. So what did it feel like being in the presence of this great man? I wasn't ready for this question, especially it was an emotional moment. It was like difficult. But what came out of me just spontaneously was that you felt that you were absolutely needed and you have a mission to accomplish that you and only you can accomplish. Now, on the interview was also Ari Goldman. He was then the religious editor for the New York Times. I think he teaches journalism in Columbia today. And I remember it was very palpable, both Charlie Rose and himself, they were like very emotional about it. Like saying, I wish someone had told me that. And that's really what it was about. It wasn't about the greatness of this man, his charisma and blue eyes or other things that people talk about. It was about you. And that's the sign of a true leader. That you don't hear about the leader, you feel you are empowered to do something with your life. And though it's many years later today, I live with that, and I believe that anyone who was touched by the Rebbe lives with that. Because you explained to me how a young couple, let's say, comes to Palo Alto, and the other rabbis and shluchim in the different areas that are here, and 40 years ago, right? To be exact. And you come as a young couple, you have no idea what anything is, what fundraising is, what business administration is. Many say, if I knew, I don't know if I would have, but you come with a passion and a drive that you can change the world, and that total confidence. And then you look back, and it's sometimes quite miraculous because you're not really trained. There's no training school. But the training is deeper than that. It's the training of igniting a soul that knows that it can make a difference and has to do whatever it takes to make that difference. And that doesn't turn us into perfect human beings. At least for myself, I can't speak for you. But it changes your life because there's a compelling sense of urgency that when you wake up in the morning, you jump out of bed with a certain excitement that carpe diem, it seize the day because you have something that you need to accomplish today. And life is difficult, there's no doubt about it. But the only way to deal with difficulties of life is not to numb yourself or to avoid the difficulties, is to have something even more powerful, which is the driving mission of your life, and then the difficulties are overshadowed by that sense of purpose. This is the way I would capture, and I would say this to any audience, the people who know what Chabad, Lubavitch is, or Yuchvat or not, because everybody's seeking this. I mean, if you could bottle this formula, what would it do to our children, to the next generation, teaching children that they have an indispensable contribution to make? You can ignite that in a person. I mean, how many problems would that preempt? I was once sitting with a group of teenagers at risk, they call them today. These young men and women who had gone through a lot of challenges, drugs and alcohol and other stuff, and they were already on the rebound. It was like an informal, I knew a few of them, so we were sitting and talking. So I said to them, I said, tell me, nobody wakes up one day and says, I want to become an addict, right? How did you get yourself into trouble like this in the first place? And each one had their own story. One person said, my parents were going through an ugly divorce. It was very painful. So I began to drink and just like numb myself a bit. Another person, I fell in with bad friends. Everyone had their story. I said, yeah, but there are a lot of people with bad friends and going through difficulties in life, and they don't end up hitting rock bottom in whatever addiction it may be. So we're going around again and again. I was trying to dig deeper. I had an agenda. And I said, how about boredom? How much does a boredom play a role in your life? Boredom. And I saw right away on their faces, they said, absolutely. Because if you combine boredom with the other problems, then you have yourself a very volatile, breeding ground for all difficulties. Because the human spirit loathes vacuum. Like they say, nature loathes a vacuum, so does the human spirit. And if you don't have anything that excites you, you're going to need to feed that fiery soul, the flame of your soul. And what do you feed it with? Whatever comes your way. If you're thirsty, very thirsty, you'll drink. If you don't have water, you'll drink toxins, God forbid. So we don't really see the impact of that void until sometimes it's too late. The best preemptive medicine to that is filling it with a passion toward good things. Around a year and a half ago, we now COVID almost 2 years, right? March 2020. So I remember it was June 2020. So I know some people in the Board of Education in some of the cities. So I was asked to speak on a Zoom to high school students, public students from across different cities, about 1,200 kids. And on the Zoom, everyone had their chat. And I opened up by asking a question. I said, what are the 3 most important things in your life now? And people wrote the chats, and then someone summed it up. More or less, people spoke about the young boys and girls. They were talking about 14, 16-year-olds. Family, values, love, relationships. And if I had asked you that question January 2020, the answer, sex, video games, and sports. You see the difference. Because suddenly, when your comfort zones are disrupted, and security blankets are stripped from you, as Warren Buffett says about investments, you don't know who's been swimming naked until the tide is out, So when things are going well, we take things for granted. But suddenly, everything got disrupted. Every sector of society, school, travel, sports, everything. So now, what do you stand for? And this is what I would say sums up the message that the Rebbe in 1950, on this day, 72 years ago, taught. Yes, he spoke in the traditional Torah language, spoke in Yiddish primarily, but this was the underlying point. So you can imagine how that ignited young men and women, because here you have a cause, a worthy cause, that is not just a good thing to do, but it's going thousands of years. You can be a pioneer, a trailblazer, and really make a difference. And I say it to each of us here, and everyone that's listening, wherever you may be, that there is a formula, there is an algorithm, and it's accessible, and it's not that difficult. It's just a question of getting out of our own lethargy and our own comfort zones. I remember reading, you've heard of Admiral Adam Rickover? So he came, I think, right before the Holocaust, before World War II, to the United States, and he grew in the ranks, a Jew from Poland, and he became in the Navy, U.S. Navy, the highest general is 4-star, not 5. So he became a 4-star general in the Navy. He was considered the father of the nuclear Navy, they call him. But he gave a talk in 1955. I found it, since it's close to 1955, 1950, 51, I'm talking about these years, post-World War II, which was a watershed time because we know what the wars caused, not just to the Jews, but to the world. Over hundreds of millions of people dead, and besides all the rest of the destruction. So it was a new world order that was being born then, exactly when the Rebbe became leader. So in his talk, one fascinating statistic that just I couldn't, it was like so, he said that from 1855 to 1955, in the fields, real human labor. And in 1955, 90% of energy generated in 1850 are human labor, and 90%, approximately, or maybe 88, something like that, of energy generated in 1955 is machines. And two major shifts happened, and that's then. Now we're talking about 2022, you can imagine. And two major changes happened because of that. First of all, an explosion of wealth, unprecedented. Because now, yeah, you can run 100 farms, and you could be very wealthy. But now you control the button, the money that you make is astronomical. And the second thing is not just the rise of wealth, also the rise of a thing called leisure, a lot of free time. In 1855, and definitely before that, when you spent 8 hours a day toiling in the field just to make get a bushel of grain or potatoes or rice, so you could survive and then sell off the extra or trade it off, you don't really have time for, let's put it this way, for addictions. And you don't have time actually even for domestic strife, because you're sweating, and by the time you get at night, you're exhausted. But now, that same loaf of bread, all you got to do is press a button and you have it delivered to your house within 10 minutes. So what happens with all the time? Well, how was it filled? Now, he didn't really elaborate on that point. That's the one I really jumped on. So what happened to all that free time? Did human beings suddenly spend all that time turning into thinkers and philosophers and how to make this world a better place? No. It became empty time. It's called leisure. It's called hanging around. What are you doing today? Nothing. And it's like an achievement. You know, there's a story in Chelm, these old Jews in Chelm, all these psychological insights. So an old Jew is sitting on a bench, and his friend comes over and says to him, "Why are you so depressed, Yankel?" He says, "My wife is very angry at me today." "Well, nothing new. She's always angry at you. He says, "No, something special today." "What happened?" "She was going to work in the morning. She asked me what I'm going to do, and I said nothing. So she said, 'You said that yesterday.' So I told her I wasn't finished." So we've created the concept of a couch potato. You're a couch potato. What are you into? Sports. "Oh, really? Which sports?" "Football, baseball, basketball." How often do you play?" He said, "No, I watch it, you know." What do they say? It's like 50,000 people in the stadium who need to lose weight are watching 18 people who don't need to, you know. Point being is, that was an inside joke between us. Okay. So we've created this concept, and if you think about it, in life, nothing is doing nothing. It doesn't exist. This is a mobile universe. Today, even if you think nothing is happening. There's no such thing as inanimate. Subatomic particles are pulsating all the time, even if it doesn't seem to the naked eye. Life is by definition movement. So when the Rebbe turned 70, it was in the year 1972. So he mentioned in his public talk that he gave, that he's getting all these letters that you're already 70 years old, look how much you've accomplished. Time to retire. Time to just enjoy the fruits of your labor. You don't need to work that hard. Now, if you knew the Rebbe, the concept this was not even, and he smiled, the Rebbe smiled and said, age is not dependent on the passport. And what does it mean to retire? You're sent to this world to fill a mission. What are you going to, suddenly the mission ends? And I'm not talking about, of course, we adjust at different age, different type of exertion and so on. But the idea of productivity. And it wasn't just because we're workaholics, because we have a mission to accomplish. And a mission-centric life creates something that's completely different. Completely different. I want to go back just to conclude what I spoke about those teenagers. So afterwards, I learned from some of those teens, they got involved in a project, which I thought was a great idea. Some guy who's also in the rehab and recovery movement got these young men and women to become part of a new film production, and they all studied choreography, filmmaking, design, and they began creating films, especially themes of things that they were involved in. And you have to see how their lives were changed. So suddenly passion was directed in a healthy place. We are passionate human beings by definition. And if it's not going to be going in the right place, it's going to go in the wrong place. Simple as that. That's the rule of nature. There's no way you can stop it. If you're lucky, maybe a child won't get into trouble, but it's inevitable. So how do we infuse our children, ourselves for that matter, with a passion that will preempt the need for passion in the wrong areas? So it comes back down to this simple statement that you were sent to this world on a mission. Now, I'm not here to prove, I don't believe in proofs and debates. People ask the question, how do you know there's a God? And how do you know we're on a mission? Maybe with just one accident. You know, take the prevalent evolutionary theory that we're just accidents anyway. So this is, maybe we'll spend the rest of the night, we can debate this argument. A long time ago I discovered that debates don't work because you can't prove anything anyway, 100%. For every argument there's an argument the other way around. You can't even prove that we exist for that matter. Maybe all this is an illusion, a matrix of a program written by machines, and every proof you bring is also part of the illusion. Can you disprove that? You can't. So you have to make a choice. Either you want to live a life that has a life of purpose and meaning, even though you may not have a mathematical proof for it. But frankly, most of the issues in life don't have proofs anyway. Can you prove that love means something? You know, Schopenhauer, the thinker, says that love is just a evolutionary trick to get a man and a woman to breed because you need to have survival of the species. And this whole idea of courtship and dating and all that is actually a mutation. Animals don't have to waste time and money and all that. You know, do what you got to do and perpetuate the species. You can make an argument about anything, but we have to make resonating decisions in our lives. A resonating decision, what resonates as being truthful. And the idea that you and I are here on this earth for a purpose and a mission and indispensable, for me it resonates. Again, not because of an ego thing, because it's the only way you can make sense of life, especially when you deal with the pains and so many difficulties in life. It's the only way to get anywhere. I mean, Viktor Frankl turned it into whole logotherapy, man's search of meaning, where he said clearly that the people, and he witnessed it in the Holocaust, it wasn't just theory, even though he developed his theories before the Holocaust, that those that had a life of meaning suffered as much as anyone else, but they had an extra edge. They had an extra deeper sense of life, and that gave them ability to make it through. Without that, then such pain and such suffering, how could you manage? I remember once asking, my father was a journalist I mentioned, so he was good friends with Elie Wiesel. And I maintained the friendship after my father passed away 16 years ago. And I remember I asked him once, and I've asked many Holocaust survivors a similar question. I said, is it true? And I asked with respect, I said, I'm an American spoiled brat, but is it true that the Jews, as they were marched to the gas chambers, they sometimes would sing a song called Ani Mamin, I believe with complete faith in the coming of Mashiach, Messiah. So he said, we were in the barracks, they kept us away from the gas chambers, even though we knew what was happening. But I can tell you on a daily basis, in the barracks and outside, wherever we were, all the time you heard this song, another song, prayers, Shema, Kaddish, all the time. So I said, so here's my question. And it's coming from a very innocent place. This was the darkest moment in Jewish history. The Jews had all the right to be tremendously angry at God for forsaking them. Where was God? The Jews were being killed because they were God's children. So where's God? And yet they're singing God's praises and Kaddish and sanctifying His name and Ani Mamin, we believe no matter what. It's like insanity. So his response, and as I heard similar ideas, sentiments echoed by others, he said, first of all, we know Jews are a little insane, so that's not such a surprise. But on a serious note, it was actually the exact opposite. This wasn't an act of desperation or escapism or denial. This was a declaration that even if you take our bodies, you can't take our souls. And even if you take our lives, you can't take our faith and our values. And if it won't be us, it will be our children. And if it won't be our children, it will be our grandchildren. But we will prevail. So right now, yes, we're at your mercy, but you cannot take things that are beyond the physical. So I remember being Hanukkah once in Germany, in Berlin, and the rabbi took me to the Brandenburg Gate, where Yamach Shema Hitler stood, and we have pictures and videos with his hundreds of thousands of Jugendrat, his young Nazis, right there in that hole, that square. And what's standing right now where Hitler once stood? A Hanukkah menorah. And to the right and left, there are two Christmas trees. So I asked the rabbi, how did you pull that off? He said, I convinced the curator that for the choreography of the location, it would look nice to have the menorah in the center, the trees on the sides. And you see little Jewish children running around with a kippot, while the children and grandchildren of the Nazis have changed their names and are hiding their identities. So yes, we 1/3 of our people were decimated. I'm not going to minimize that ever. But what happened afterwards? The big picture, the narrative. And this is not once in history, it's throughout history. So you have to ask yourself, where does this Jewish resilience come from? I hear from people who visit the Dalai Lama, and if they're Jewish, you always ask them the same question. He says, what are you coming to me? I can learn from you more than you can learn from me. And remember, he's in exile. How did you make it without a land for so many years, and without a country, without armies, and without money, and being persecuted? So I want to share a story that always captures, especially in this day, Yud Shvat. The previous Rebbe, who passed away in this day, 73 years ago, as you probably may know, suffered greatly in a very overt way. First in the former Soviet Union, he assumed leadership in 1920. You know what 1920 was like? The Bolsheviks were coming to power. Stalin would come to power a few years later, and he was another Hitler, just in a different fashion. And literally the Jews, they say there were over 10 million Jews in Russia at the time. No one even knows the numbers. And without going into all the details, he was arrested, tortured, suffered greatly. Anyway, this only got worse as Then he left Russia in 1927, ended up in Europe. And then, of course, the Nazis come to power. So from the frying pan into the fire, suffered, and finally comes to America in 1940, barely getting off the last ship, coming on the last ship out of Sweden, a whole challenging situation of its own. When the Rebbe comes off, the Friedrich Rebbe, of the boat, today we have video of it, he's in a wheelchair because he was already suffering from MS and also the torture and other things that had taken a toll on his health. And those that know today, we know he was really not well physically. Now, this is a 12-day ordeal, this ride over the seas, over the Atlantic. So they brought the Rebbe and his family, talking about penniless, leaving all his Hasidim and his students, disciples back in Nazi Europe. I mean, you could just imagine the scene and the feelings. So everyone thought the Rebbe would want to rest after all this. No, he wants to say a few words. So in the Greystone Hotel in Manhattan, the Rebbe sitting in his wheelchair, the Friedrich Rebbe. And mind you, the Rebbe, his father-in-law, his son-in-law, and his daughter were still in Nazi Europe. They would come out another year and a half later, also a harrowing escape. And he begins to speak. And he says, I did not come to America to save my life. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't want to come to America. I wanted to stay with my brothers and sisters. It's God sent me here, brought me here. And to do what? Not just to live comfortably, now that I'm saved, but to transform this country into being exactly as the spiritual environment that we had back in the old shtetl. And to prove that America is not different, as many people in those years would say. And he went on speaking in this way, that we're going to create a revolution. Now, there were 20, 30 people in the room. And I was so taken the first time I heard about it, I said I had to hear from an eyewitness. So there were people that were there. Remember Rabbi Groner from Australia. There was Rabbi Schusterman from Chicago. I mean, people that were there were students. And I asked them independently, I said, tell me what you remember. And they all said the same thing. The Rebbe was speaking like in this way, like he's speaking to millions of people. And you wouldn't think that there's any challenges, everything can be accomplished. Now, here's the punchline. After he finished, so the Rebbe went to his room, and his Hasidim that were there, his disciples, his students, his followers, his supporters, and some of them Americans at that point, said to the Rebbe they'd like to come and say a few words to the Rebbe. Okay, they come in, and we know this from the Rebbe's diary, because he writes what they told him. They said, Rebbe, we want to just tell you something. Because we love you so much, and we honor the sacred honor of your life and your father's and grandfather and great-grandfather and all the holy Rebbes and Tzaddikim, we want you to lower your expectations. We don't want the Rebbe to get disappointed. This is not happening, what the Rebbe said. This is not realistic. And they said out of love. They wanted to protect the Rebbe's, The Friedrich Rebbe did not respond to them, but in his diary he writes the following line. He says, after they left, he writes in Yiddish, I'll say it in Yiddish. He said, man kann sich vorstellen, die Tränen, was ein gegossen von meinen Augen, die erste Nacht, was ich gewinnt auf Amerikaner Boden. You can imagine the tears that were dripping from my eyes the first night on American soil, hearing this from my friends, not my enemies. Now, obviously, thank God the Friedrich Rebbe did not listen to them. And that's what makes a leader a leader. Leaders don't necessarily just go along with people's calculations, because it's not a statistic. If you went by statistics, read every news article after 1945, and it'll tell you that there won't be any Jews left by the time 1990 comes around, because a third of them were destroyed. Rabbis, leaders, teachers, communities were completely decimated, and assimilation was destroying Judaism in America. So if you were a statistician, of course, how long does it take? It will go extinct. The problem is that Judaism was never subject to statistics and mathematical equations and actuarial. So the Rebbe did not listen, And he did what he did from a wheelchair, weak physically and so on, but not in spirit. When the Rebbe assumed leadership 10 years later, 1950, on this day, so though now the world was very different. World War was over, World War II, but there was a new challenge. Going back to Rickover's statement, the challenge that we'll say is wherever there's comfort, the byproduct of comfort is apathy. You can't afford being apathetic when you're running for your life. But when you're comfortable, it's always tomorrow. Apathy. And I can't resist the joke. The guy asked his friend, what's worse, apathy or ignorance? And he said, I don't know, and I don't care. There you go. That's apathy. There's always tomorrow. I'm doing nothing today. It's fine. You don't speak that way when you're fighting for your life. Now, God forbid, we're not talking about turning back the clock. But I would say that Yud Shvat, another aspect of it, another way of putting it is a declaration of war by the Rebbe against apathy. It was no longer the war against Soviets or Nazis or Cossacks or pogroms and inquisitions and crusaders and so on, or Egyptians or Babylonians and Romans throughout our history. Apathy is a far, far harder enemy. It's not quite as threatening as someone wants to kill you, but it kills your spirit. So the Rebbe went to a war against apathy. This I witnessed with my own eyes, and that's something that is almost impossible to ignore, because you see it. You see the power of it, the power of as I said, a mission-centric life. So here we are honoring this. It's 72 years later. And people wonder, the Rebbe passed away in 1994. It's almost 30 years since that. So how are we still talking about these things? These are people that physically are not here anymore. Or like more than one person has asked me, how does a company survive without a CEO? Assuming the Rebbe is the CEO and the company is Chabad. And the answer is because the Rebbe is not a CEO and Chabad is not a company. It's the same question you can ask. How did Judaism survive 4,000 years? Who's exactly this? Who's the CEO? Because you're talking about a spiritual movement here. And a spiritual movement, when you empower people to be leaders and to own their commitments, then they don't have to be dependent on a boss watching them or not watching them. It just lives. So I stand here very proud to say, a student, a disciple that did sit at the feet of the Rebbe, among thousands of others. I had the unique gift and responsibility with a select few to remember, retain, and absorb the Rebbe's teachings, which to me were not just ideas, they were life-changing ideas. And that makes you remember a lot better. If you have to just memorize ideas that are not relevant, I don't know if I'd be able to quite do the same. But that type of absolute relevance, knowing that these are teachings that can change your life and the life of everyone around you, creates a whole different compelling sense of urgency. So I can go on and on about this. This is for me the love of my life, if I can put it in that way. And when you talk about the love of your life, you can talk forever, right? And that's, but I don't see it as mine per se. I'm just sharing my own experiences. So when I wrote Toward a Meaningful Life and the work I do today, I'm still that 17-year-old guy with, with 38 years of experience. And the energy and that spirit that even when I have my eyes open, especially when I close my eyes, of a force of what I would call immortality in this world. Yes, infinity. And if those of you study the mimer, the discourse called Basi I mentioned earlier, which has 20 chapters, each chapter corresponds to another year. This year's chapter 12. It's the story of manifesting the infinite in our lives. And if this is not infinite, that after everything we've gone through, and we see people who seemed to be at the abyss, almost completely hopeless, and yet we're able to muster up something deeper, I don't know if there's anything more eternal or infinite than that. But the problem is our comforts, which are a great blessing. But we have to learn how to ignite passion and not allow apathy to paralyze us. Because that's what it does. With all the negative stuff of COVID, and I've witnessed deaths, family members, friends in my community, other parts of the world, so it's not like we speak about it lightly. I'm not getting down to the politics of it, I'm talking about the real thing. But one thing I've witnessed that I've not seen my whole life, I've never seen such a wake-up call. I can tell you from my own work, literally the last 2 years, quadrupled, both in reach and receptivity. Because when people are vulnerable, they are open to hearing deeper truths. Why it has to be that way, I don't know. It's one of those big mysteries. Can you wake someone up when they're comfortable? Not that easy. When everything is seemingly going well, people say, come back tomorrow, you know. So do we have to wait for tragedy, for loss? This is something maybe we can debate. Maybe someone has a theory around this. But the fact of the matter is that we shouldn't wait. And this is a tremendous wake-up call. A wake-up call because it forces us to get beyond things we thought were not optional. Suddenly we realize they're quite optional. And interesting things happen to the human race, to the human psyche, when something you thought you can't live without, and suddenly you realize I could live without. It could be disconcerting, but it could also be very empowering. So, on concluding note, at least this section of this evening, right? We're going to bring more. I want to say to each of you, I was trained, and this is how I think, and this is how I see it, and I hope we all see it this way. Each of you, right here, you are a magnificent soul sent to this world on a unique journey. The journey can be at times quite difficult, sometimes dark, many twists and turns. But the magnificence and the majesty of your soul is never compromised. The challenge is that you should be aware of it. That the angel shouldn't just be trapped in the marble, but you should actually be able to access it. And that's why we come together. That's why we call it a Farbrengen. We come together. They say the difference between a party, a speech, and a Farbrengen is this. A speech, one person speaks and nobody listens, especially if it's a rabbi. A party, everybody's speaking and nobody's listening. And the Farbrengen, nobody's speaking but everybody's listening. Now you'll say, 1 second, someone is speaking, but the point is, it's not the speech. When I speak, I like to believe that it's all of us speaking, and it's not about any individual. It's about trying to share eternal and common truths that we all are connected by. And when you see people that way, that doesn't mean we're naive, and obviously people can be hurtful and they can do things that are not so beautiful, but the soul is always beautiful. And when you can see people that way, and that's what you expect from each other, what we expect from each other, then think of it this way, that each of us is an indispensable musical note in a large composition, a large cosmic symphony, with each note necessary and each note complementing the other. So we need each other, but we also are each one of us is needed. And that ultimately our mission in this world is to sing your song, your unique song. There's a tragic poem called The Voiceless by Oliver Wendell Holmes, where he writes, "Alas to those that die with their song still inside them." You hear that? Alas to those that die with their song still inside them. I don't know if you got it from the Kabbalah or Zohar, but this is essential Jewish thinking, that there's songs inside you, just like the angels and the flowers and all the other analogies I gave. And it's our mission is to discover the song and have the courage to sing it. I remember my son, when he was a young boy, came home from school, and he was all excited. He was excited, so I got excited. What are you so excited about? I heard today, you were born an original, don't become a copy. So a few years ago, I reminded him, I said, remember the story? He didn't remember, but I remembered. So I said, so what happened with you? Are you original or a copy? Now, no pun intended, he happens to be a copywriter. So he says to me, I'm an original copy, whatever that means. Okay, a wordsmith's twist of words. You were born an original, don't become a copy. That, no matter how old you are, no matter where you are in your life, you have that power inside you. So if I'm able to convey a little of that confidence that I heard so many times from the Rebbe speaking, that's, I think, what we should be doing, is appreciating that and knowing that there are those that believe in you, especially God, above all, and that we have something to accomplish. You have something to accomplish. I have something to accomplish that you and only you can accomplish. So if we can go away from this special gathering with that commitment to find out what that is, and even if you know there's always more to grow, so there's no limit, and increase in both committing to find out what it is and to actualize it, I think then we can say that this Farbrengen, this gathering, was worth the time and the effort. Not that, trust me, I've said a lot of things that didn't go anywhere. So, but my point is, we want to do justice to a special day like this, and that it should turn into something that really bears fruit. So I want to thank you again, first of all, for having me and the attention. And what shall I say? It's beautiful to be with you, and it's beautiful to be able to share this world that God put us in, this world, 2022, in this time, in this space, and to look at the sphere of influence that each of us has and try to bring that light to be givers and not just takers, but to make it viral, a positive viral force, and that ultimately, yes, we'll all sing together and celebrate together in this grand cosmic symphony called humanity in one beautiful dance with God, with each other, and with the entire world. Thank you so much. Okay.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Jacobson, for that incredible, inspiring talk, which I'm sure will stay with us, everyone here, for a very long time. We're going to continue to have a Farbrengen if anyone would like to stay. Thank you all for joining us. And we hope to have another gathering like this very soon, Mitzvah Hashem. Thank you all. Good night. How do you make the speaker go? Make it broadcast? It's already go. No, I mean, but to make it loud here. So we don't have that. Is it? I'm not talking. Okay. Everybody, we're going to come sit down, and some have to leave, so we're going to start. Rabbi Felsen, hi, nice to see you. We have some local rabbis who have to leave, so we're going to start with a few local rabbis. One local and is also national international Rabbi David Foreman, who's the head of Aleph Beta, and he is also a dear friend of mine that I've known for many years. And I have two of the, I'll get it open for you. And I've all of my favorite rabbis here. It's a great blessing. I know, say l'chaim, and wish Rabbi Foreman, all the rabbis here, good health, happiness, nachas, success, reward, and all things material and spiritual. I'll ask Rabbi Foreman to speak now. He's the head of Aleph Beta. You can find him online. He's also a very famous, world-renowned speaker, and I'm very grateful that he came to just say a vort. And thank you so much, Rabbi Foreman.
Okay. Okay. So, Ike, I want to wish you a very happy birthday and a congratulations to you. And it's a thrill to be here to be part of the celebration, and an honor to listen to Rabbi Jacobson and his very inspiring words. I want to leave you with just a short thought, picking up on something that Rabbi Jacobson mentioned about the purpose of life being to somehow figure out a way to manifest the infinite in this world. And to that end, I'd like to pose a puzzle to you. It's a puzzle that that has puzzled me over the years, and recently I think I may have found some insight into it. It's a puzzle that has to do with Kiddush on Shabbos. The source for the idea of Kiddush comes from a verse in which we say in the Ten Commandments, Zachor et Yom HaShabbat l'kadsho. Conventionally, we translate the words Zachor et Yom HaShabbat l'kadsho as remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And yet, the Gemara says that the word Zachor has more than one meaning. It doesn't just mean to remember, it means to mention, perhaps to verbalize that memory. And that's the source for the idea of Kiddush. We have to mention Shabbos somehow and thereby sanctify it. But if you really think deeply about those words, Zachorat Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsho, if you really think deeply about the meaning of Kiddush, Kiddush isn't just an empty ceremony. It's not just something you say on Friday night before you sit down and you break bread. It is what the verse suggests it is. Literally, Zachor et Yom HaShabbat L'Kadsho. By remembering the Sabbath day, or by mentioning the Sabbath day, oh, that is very nice and warm. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Stick very close by. by mentioning the Sabbath day, we actually do something spectacular in the world. We actually affect Shabbos. We make the Sabbath holy. We consecrate the Sabbath. To consecrate something, as you may know, right? When you consecrate a korban, you actually change its status from mundane to holy. It affects a spectacular change in the world. And it seems counterintuitive, right? Because you would think, the Sabbath is the Sabbath. It doesn't really have to do with me. And yet somehow, Zachor Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsho seems to suggest that it does. That we have the ability to sanctify the Sabbath, to make a difference into the world, to bring holiness into the world. Somehow through our words, through our memories, which seems strange. How would something as ephemeral, as a word, as a memory, bring holiness into the world? And it strikes me that puzzle is wrapped up, as Winston Churchill said, in an enigma, all part of a greater mystery. And the larger enigma and the mystery that puzzle is wrapped up in is the actual blessing that we make when we make Kiddush. What is the blessing of Kiddush? The final blessing of Kiddush that you say on Friday night is Baruch Atah Hashem Mikadesh HaShabbat. Blessed are you, God, who makes the Sabbath holy. So I understand what's going on. Who makes the Sabbath holy? Us or God? Here's this obligation that we have of Zachor Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsho, to remember the Sabbath, to mention the Sabbath, and thereby to make it holy, seemingly suggesting that that's our job, that's something we do. But then when we actually do it, the blessing that we make is that it's not us, it's you. Baruch Atah Hashem Mikadesh HaShabbat. You, God, are the one who sanctifies the Sabbath. So what's going on? It sounds tautological. It sounds circular. How does it make sense? That's the puzzle. What do you say? It's a good puzzle. I think that deserves a drink. L'chaim. Right? I mean, it's strange. What does it mean? Who makes the Sabbath holy? If we're supposed to do it, why do we pass the buck to God? It strikes me that the answer might be found in the next words that the Torah gives after Zachor Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsho. Zachor Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsho appears in the Ten Commandments, but as you know, the Ten Commandments has two versions of it. And in the two versions, two different rationales are given for the meaning of Shabbos, for the reason why we keep it. One rationale is Zeichel Yetziat Mitzrayim. We keep it to remember the Exodus from Egypt. But the other rationale is that we keep it, according to the other version of the Ten Commandments, Zeichel Ma'aseh Bereshit, as a memory of the days of creation, as a memory of God's creating the world. It's interesting that Kiddush mentions both of them, that it travels to Zeichel Yetziat Mitzrayim. Interestingly enough, if you look at the language of Kiddush, the language of Kiddush speaks of God first in third person when we talk about God creating the world, and then in second person when we talk about him bringing us out of Egypt. What's the difference between third person and second person? Third person in Hebrew is nistar. Second person is nochach. When you talk about something in the third person, they're not around. If I would say, what would Rabbi Felsen like to eat? It's as if I'm addressing him as if he's not around. But if I say, hey, Rabbi Felsen, what would you like to eat? Second person, it's nochach, he's present. When we speak of God as the author of creation, we speak of him in third person. When we speak of God as the one who brought us out of Egypt, we speak of him in second person. Why? Answer is we weren't quite around when the world was created, but we were when we were brought out of Egypt. What does it mean when we think of Zacharat Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsho, remembering the Sabbath to make it holy? What Sabbath do we remember? That version of the Ten Commandments speaks of the Sabbath of creation. It strikes me that the Sabbath of creation is actually our earliest memory. There's a great Hasidic concept. I'm not such a Hasid, but there's a great Hasidic concept which is echoed really throughout the mystical traditions of the entire world. Emerson wrote an essay about it called The Oversoul. The idea is that even though we may have individual souls, the oversoul, the soul of humanity as a whole, that even though individuals may have a soul, we also have a communal soul as humanity. And as humanity, that soul has a collective memory. And if I ask you, what is the earliest memory of that soul, of the human soul? What would it be? We were created on the sixth day. Our earliest memory would have been the seventh, would have been spending Shabbos together in Eden with God, just before we were banished and took our last look at Eden and left for a world of our own making. Our earliest memory was of Sabbath. But there's two kinds of Sabbaths in the world. One is God's Sabbath, and the other is ours. God's Sabbath took place on the seventh day of creation. It took place once. When God finished creation, he rested in an epoch called the seventh day. And that's God's Sabbath. But then God turned to us centuries later and said, you guys, you humans, you should have a Sabbath too. When I worked, God, I rested on my seventh day. That was my Sabbath. When you human beings work, in a week, every seventh day, you should rest. That's your Sabbath. Your Sabbath is a whole different thing. It's based on my Sabbath. But here's the question. How are you going to make your Sabbath holy? I, God, made my Sabbath holy. The verses in Genesis tell us, Vayivarech Elokim et Yom HaShvi, Vayikadesh oto. God blessed the seventh day, and then he made it holy. He made his Sabbath holy. Centuries later, the question would be, how do we make ours holy? And God says there's a solution. And the solution has to do with memory. Access your deepest memory as humans. What's your first memory in the infanthood of humanity? The first thing you remember was being with me in Eden during my Sabbath. Draw on that memory. Think about it. Mention that memory. And in doing so, you will take from the holiness of my Sabbath, draw it forth through your memory into your Sabbath. And through that memory, make it holy. Zachor et Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsho. Remember that primal Sabbath to make your Sabbath holy. Because as that version of the Ten Commandments says, Shabbos is Zecher L'Maaseh Bereshit. Shabbos recalls Maaseh Bereshit. So remember the Sabbath of Maaseh Bereshit. By doing so, you make your Sabbath holy. You bring Kedusha, you bring holiness into your world. And therefore, it's fitting that the bracha that we make on Friday night, when we do this, when we make the Sabbath holy through our memory, drawing upon God's holiness in his Sabbath, we say, Baruch atah Hashem Mekadesh HaShabbat. Blessed are you, God, who made the first Sabbath holy, the Sabbath that we remember. And so I just want to conclude that Getting to what Rabbi Jacobson was saying, that the purpose of life being to manifest the infinite in the world, that's what we're doing every time we make Kiddush. Every time we say Shabbos, we're doing something astonishing, really. We're doing something which is seemingly little, ephemeral, using words, using memories, but drawing upon a wellspring of holiness that exists from the first primeval moments of creation to bring it into our daily world of work and to change one of those days into a world which is rest, which partakes of the sublime, partakes of that original Shabbos. And therefore, when we bless God not just for the sanctity of Shabbos, but for the sanctity that's in ourselves. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kiddishanu b'mitzvosav v'ratzavanu. You made us holy with your commandments. In giving this opportunity, we're the conduits through our memories to bring holiness into the world, and in so doing, we become holy too, because we're tools to manifest the infinite. Thanks. Good Shabbos.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Foreman. And now we'll turn the mic over to Rabbi Jacobson. And Julio, can you have the lapel? Is it working? Sorry, Rabbi Yosef Levin would like to speak.
I have a profound thought. Let's all say l'chaim. Some people who just came in, some shluchim, please say l'chaim. Come closer to the table.
Probably tell him to zoom it. Such as l'chaim, l'chaim. Tell him there's a camera.
Guys, we have Bamba here. Want to remind everybody we're streaming live to the whole world right now?
This is a Farbrengen.
8 billion people.
We're going to relax.
8 billion people are watching your back throwing bamba. Tell this guy. Doesn't even realize. Okay. Oblivious. L'chaim, l'chaim. Since it's Yud Shvat, the 10th of Shvat, and which is its a cornerstone, is captured in the discourse that I mentioned earlier, Basi, which is a verse in the book Song of Songs, Come to my garden, where God is speaking to the human race, that he wants to join us, and we should join him in this garden, the world as a garden. And that's why indeed the beginning of creation, the Garden of Eden, is the central location where all activity happens. Had the human race, Adam and Eve, done what they had to do, so it would have remained a garden. But then this garden got, shall we say, the weeds began to grow. So even the most beautiful gardens can get somewhat defiled. And then it's our mission is to reclaim the beauty of a garden. So in this discourse, which was published for that Shabbos, Yud Shvat, 72 years ago, it was on Shabbos. So it was a discourse of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, and as was the custom by the Rebbes, that where their predecessor concluded, they began. Everything is a continuity. So the first discourse that the Rebbe delivered a year later, 1951, also began Basi Legani. Now this discourse has 20 chapters, and at the time we were not aware of the Rebbe's plan, because that year, 1951, when he delivered the discourse, which was like his official recognition or official accepting the leadership, because a Maimer Chassidus, a discourse, was not just a talk, it was a formal presentation. Go ahead.
Someone's blocking the driveway. Gray van in the driveway. If you could please back out, we would appreciate it. Okay, go ahead.
That reminds me of a joke. Was this planned?
No.
Oh.
Gray van in the driveway, anybody?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
I think we found the culprit.
So I was once invited to speak somewhere, and the host introduced me, and he began to give this whole fancy introduction, eloquent introduction, and he said, Rabbi Jacobson will be speaking about the non-existential nature of the divine in an existential world. But then he went on and said, but before we begin, I just want to make an announcement. This is not, don't take this personally. People have been leaving their wet towels in the gym, and it's just, it's becoming unbearable. And we will start penalizing. And now Rabbi Jacobson on the non-existential nature of God in the existential world. So I think that was my cue, because, Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance type of idea. I talked about wet towels as an example of existentialism. So it just came to mind when you made that announcement. No, it's all right. Listen, the world needs to know about this. What's going on in Chabad of Palo Alto? So back to the non-existential. But then the subsequent years, 1952, then 53, every year on this anniversary, the Rebbe would focus on one of the chapters corresponding. So 1952 was chapter 2, 1953 chapter 3. When it came to 1970, which was chapter 20, so no one knew what would happen in 1971, so the Rebbe began the cycle again. It's a different type of explanation. And so it went, so it became a custom till this day that we continue the cycle every 20 years. So this year corresponds to chapter 12. So I thought appropriate, even though I did speak about it before in more universal terms, to talk a bit about this chapter, and above all, its application to our lives. Now, what we have here is not just the chapter 12, we also have the Rebbe's discourse in 1962 and in 1982. So I'll try to sum it up in simple English, if possible, but it's quite fascinating, and I hope we can all follow along here. So I'm not going to repeat the actual text, but a few key points. And one of the big questions in life, which I alluded to earlier, was, how high can a person reach? If you go from the most depressing perspective on the human race, that we're essentially beasts, animals, the Freudian id, then obviously what can you really expect of an animal, of a beast? I'm talking about from an ethical and moral or spiritual point of view. The most you can expect is that we will build, hopefully, good technologies and try to coexist. But at the heart of it, push comes to shove, survival of the fittest, dog eats dog, and that's that. You know, it's interesting if you ask people how many subscribe to that approach to life. Most people are not going to like to admit that, but most people live that way, let's be honest. If you go to the other extreme, let's take a biblical take on the human being. So the Bible says very straightforward, right at the outset, the human being was created in the divine image. You're a piece of the divine, and just as the divine is really unlimited possibilities, so too you, the human being, can grow to the greatest heights and climb the greatest mountains and scale and conquer the widest horizons. And then there's all the schools of thought in between. And this isn't just a philosophical discussion. The practical relevance of it is, do you believe in yourself? I mean, I can't say this as a scientific statistic, but from my little experience, talking to people, most people will say, when I was 17, 18 years old, I thought everything was possible. Today, if I get by a day unscathed, I'm happy. Basically, expectation is lower in direct proportion to our age. And the logic behind it is, the more you get accustomed to life, you realize idealism is a little naive. I remember I once gave a talk in the Learning Annex in Manhattan, New York City. And the topic was, is there such a thing as love forever after? So I asked that question, how many of you believe in love forever after? I kid you not, I was surprised, but one woman raised her hand, one young woman. I was surprised, not that they don't believe it, I was surprised they would acknowledge it, especially with their significant other sitting near them. I like sitting near your spouse or your girlfriend or boyfriend, and you believe in forever after, and you don't say yes. It's very life-affirming. So one woman. So then I went around the room. I said, so why not? This is matters for dreams. This is fantasies, for novels, for films. That's not realistic. And then one person said it really well. They said, what do you mean? Everything in this world is temporary. The food you eat, the money you make, your age, your looks. There's not one thing in existence that does not erode and deteriorate and ultimately perish. So why suddenly comes to love? There's a forever after. And what about this young woman, I said, that does believe in it? She probably didn't yet get disappointed or betrayed in a relationship. Let's talk to her in 5 years from now. That was this, again, I'm not going to say this is a cross-section of all of the entire population, but it's I think it was a pretty accurate. So it tells you everything. What do we believe in, Now, thank God I was personally blessed to be around the Rebbe, who, not to overstate it, but really embodied and personified this, if you wish, infinity or eternity. What I mean by that is because it's not the physicality of the person, it's the values that you hold. I mentioned before Larry King. I remember when Larry King asked me the question, it was 2 days after Gimel Tammuz, after the 3rd of Tammuz in 1994, Tuesday night on Larry King Live. So he had a segment on the Rebbe. And he asked me, again, this was live, it was like all on the moment. He said, I understand that Hasidim, Chabad Hasidim or Lubavitch Hasidim are grieving the loss of their Rebbe. But why are you shocked? Why are people shocked? The Rebbe was 92 years old. It's a pretty long life. What's the shock? Everybody dies. So what came to me, at least at the moment, I said, you have to remember, for us, the Rebbe embodies, personifies Torah. And Torah survived the Holocaust and the pogroms and the inquisitions and the crusaders and all the displacements and expulsions and genocides and slavery. I mean, from Egypt through Babylon, through Romans, the Torah survived it all. So when something that embodies eternity is suddenly touched by mortality, it's not just sad, it's also shocking. That's what I said. That's the way I put it, at least. I got away with it. What I mean by that is because we also have always had someone like a contrarian who was on the program as well. And he was sitting right near me. I remember them, they went to a break, and then they were going to go to him, so to speak. I don't know. So he says to me, eternity, give me a break, tells me. So I said, go ahead. You can now contradict it. He says, I'm not that stupid. First of all, the sympathies are all with you guys now. So I'm not going to. Secondly, the way you put it, what am I going to say? The Rebbe is not Torah. The Torah is not eternal. So he actually did not really contradict. I don't even remember what he said. My point was, I wasn't trying to be cute. This is how we look at greatness. There's only one God. If you're committed to an eternal God, you become an extension of that eternity. That's the equation. If you're committed to your own self, so as great as you are, it'll go as long as you can go, like any mortal. So in many ways, this chapter 12 in Basi is talking about this element of the infinite within the finite existence. Do we really have infinity here? And though it's not stated in the words I just said, I'm explaining it a bit. But he's coming to explain the idea that when we come into this world, and we are living in many ways, even though the garden is beneath the surface, but in many ways this world can be compared also to a jungle and to a place where, as I said, survival of the fittest, and people will do anything to get ahead, to step on others. You know, those two guys go camping one night, and they're camping middle of the night. One guy gets up, he hears scurrying, looks out of the tent, and he sees a bear. So he wakes up his friend and he says to him, "We got to get out of here. There's a bear." And while he's waking him up, he's tying his shoelaces of his sneakers. So the guy says to him, "You think you can outrun the bear?" He says, "No, all I have to do is outrun you." So everybody somewhat has elements of that. We all know our uglier side, our darker sides. So it's especially as you get older, you realize, hey, life is not so perfect. All the dreams, many of our dreams were shattered, promises broken, betrayals, betrayed others, being betrayed. So it's very easy to develop a skeptical or even a cynical attitude. But when you read, so this chapter talks about, so where do we get the strength to deal with these challenges in life? Yes, we want to build the garden. We want to turn the world into a divine home, into a sanctuary. But we have to contend with real challenges. Let's not kid ourselves. Every moment, we have all kinds of temptations, what he calls in this discourse, shtus de lumazeh, which means essentially, for a good word to translate it, we have some translators here. I'm looking at one of the official translators. Some people call it unholy insanity, whatever that means. But it basically means irrational. You know, I'm sure everybody can identify with moments when you get consumed with some temptation that seduces you. And it's completely irrational. Even at the moment you know that this can be even destructive, and yet you just can't control yourself. So where's suddenly your mind and you see people do things so self-destructive so easily, and yet they do it. Yeah. And just, so again, we don't need proof for this. There's things we need proof for. This is pretty obvious. And this is called shtuz lo mazeh because it's one thing, okay, you see great benefit, long-term benefit, but even things that you know in a moment from now, as soon as you satisfy that desire, it's going to be gone. So that's called like an irrational type of obsession. So interestingly, it's not an aside, but among the many powerful formulas and so-called interventions that this discourse offers us includes that the only way to counter insanity or irrational, what do they call it, irrational exuberance? There's a word like that somewhere too. The only way to counter that is not, okay, you know what, I won't give in to something irrational, I'll just be rational. That's not enough. Because if it consumes you so much in one extreme, you have to go to the other extreme. So called super rational positivity. So shtuz de kedusha. The only way to counter an obsession one way is to be obsessed the other direction, the good way. Because then you're using the obsession that you counter it. It balances it out. So yeah, like the Rambam, left, you go too much to the left, you got to go to the other to the right. If you go the middle, you'll just keep going the wrong, yeah. But also psychologically, it's a lesson that those people that are extremely passionate about something and they get really in big trouble. You know, who are the most addictive personalities? The ones that have a lot of passion. People who are mediocre they're also mediocrely addicted, so to speak. People who are very, like extremes, can go one extreme. So the only way to solve it is you have to give them the other extreme. Because they need that energy. And in that spirit, so he continues, he says, so where do we have the strength? So he gives a comparison to a king, a leader of a nation. And every great leader, every great king has stored away in his secret vaults all the deepest treasures collected by his parents and grandparents for generations. But they remain locked, sealed. When are they so-called, when does he produce them, or when does he even splurge? When there's a war, when there's a battle. So battle evokes this need to win, to be victorious, and now that's not enough just to give your army ammunition. You give them the deepest resources. It's like any time, whenever there's deep resistance, you have to dig deeper. There's no way around it. I mean, I'm using some psychological language in recovery to talk a lot about, you know, when you really someone suffers, God forbid, a trauma or a loss that's very touches them and really shakes them to the core. So you have two choices then. You either sink, or you dig deeper and you learn how to swim. So the deepest resources will only come when there's a challenge. Our deepest strengths come when we are challenged, when there's resistance. So he gives that analogy of this, what he calls Eitzer, this treasure. But spiritually speaking, or psychologically speaking, this treasure is the deepest resources within our soul. You can call them the infinite resources. That in usual daily routines, you don't need to access that. You know, when you're sitting and eating a meal, you're going to work, or just the regular wear and tear of life, you can access some energy, but you don't need to go dig that deep. So he introduces this concept of, it's a Kabbalistic statement, but it also has very practical application, and that is that Ein Sof, that's the expression in Kabbalah, for the infinite divine light. It's infinite energy. And the cryptic term, that it goes, L'may l'mayla aden ketz, it goes up, without end, L'mata mata aden tachlis. And down, without, you can say also without end, without conclusion, without limit. And what are these two statements? What's above and what's below? So in this chapter, he talks about that the infinite is the infinite expression of something. It's endless. And what it means in practical terms for us is that we have unlimited resources. And it's still not the ultimate, Because the ultimate is the other expression, up, which he discusses in later chapters. I'll talk about that shortly. But the point in practical terms is this, that even though it's discussed in esoteric language, but it really is significant because it comes down to you come into this world, you're challenged, many challenges, and instead of becoming more resigned or more cynical or more hopeless, on the contrary, the deeper the challenge, the more it elicits from us greater strength, to the point of infinite strength. And that's where the infinite is expressed most. If you want to see the power of light, you don't look a few inches away from the light. You look, the farther you go, the more powerful you can tell how light the light is. If the light doesn't reach that far, you know it's not infinite. When it could reach the darkest places, then you know it has some type of power. And I've heard this from many people who have really recovered from very profound difficulties in life, losses, deaths, and tragedies, that it was only through those darkest moments that they discovered the greatest light in their own lives and the lives of others. So this has many different applications. And at the end of the day, I didn't even discuss the Rebbe's contributions of 1962, like I said, in 1982. We spoke more about the chapter itself. But we have a long night ahead of us. I have till 6 a.m., then I get on a flight. So a little earlier than that, right? When do we have to leave? 4:30. Okay, fine. Can we carry you on the plane over? Why don't you just carry me where I want to go? I mean, huh? So I want to say l'chaim to the infinity in each one of us and each one of you. At the power that we have. And obviously it's all words on paper, but when you also see it, like I described earlier, you see people who've come out from the hells of the World War II, whether it was the Frierdiker Rebbe in a wheelchair or the Rebbe. It's not just a theory. Now, thank God today we don't have the darkness of the past, but we have the apathy. We have different types of darkness today. Today it's really, a lot of it is self-inflicted or self-generated from within. The apathy, the leisure, the free time. So, l'chaim to the infinite ones before us and the infinite ones within us. L'chaim, l'chaim. Happy birthday again, Yitzchak. To all the shluchim, shluchah shlod and kamesei. L'chaim, l'chaim. Hey, Davis. Good shit. So let's sing Anigan. When are you? I was born 56 too. I'm Chayodar, what year? Tezayin? You're older than me. I'm Yud Zayin. I'm Hey Tavis Yud Zayin. I'm December 8th, 56. So you're like March. Okay. Yeah. He reminded me.
Someone suggested that people should invite people to ask questions.
Sure, let's do that. They have questions. I know they came with a bunch of questions. Okay, how are you? Next is question period. Okay, good. Yeah. Bam, 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 bam. L'chaim. Okay. Question answer period. Go ahead. Say again.
Chaim to Shai just bought a pair of tefillin today.
Okay. You guys can hear me, right? Oh, okay. All right. For 8 billion people. All right. Yeah. So thank you for having me today here with Rabbi of Palo Alto. Yeah, I grew up in Israel, as you probably can hear by my accent, and I was privileged enough to grow up in a Jewish community, if you want it or not, basically. And then I moved here to the U.S. from some reasons, and I don't have my community around me anymore, so it's not granted to be Jewish here for me. One of those Jewish chilonim, we usually go like once at twice at the most to a synagogue a year, Yom Kippur mostly. If there is someone's bar mitzvah, maybe we go then. Yeah, so I never asked those questions, I guess, because it was around me. There are holidays, you go to Rosh Hashanah, and your aunt or grandma or whatever, and it's just around you all the time. And now it's almost my 5th year here in the U.S., and I guess, I did start to ask those questions about, my origins and where I'm coming from, and what make me connected to myself more. And I guess the question to the rabbi that I wasn't prepared for, but I'll go for it since Yigal here is encouraging me, is I heard that there is a way to prove that there is a Torah nitna לעם ישראל בהר סיני. Basically, the reason that I'm asking that is because I do feel inside myself that I believe in God. I do feel that deeply inside me. The thing I'm struggling with is to know that, basically, the Torah nitna לעם ישראל.
Proof that the Torah was given to Am Yisrael on Har Sinai.
Har Sinai.
God gave it to Moshe. It actually happened in reality. That's your question?
Yeah. My apologies if I put you in I know that you mentioned you don't like those debates about proving, so I hope I don't put the rabbi in that position.
Okay. No, you don't have to apologize. No question is off limits. Never apologize for questions. I just take an approach which is a little unorthodox approach, if you don't mind. I'll rely on the scholars here to give you mathematical proofs and so on. I mean, I mentioned in my talk earlier, long ago, so long ago I barely remember, but long ago I gave up on proofs. To me, everything can be argued. You could have an argument this way, you have an argument that way. I know you said that you are convinced God exists. Can you absolutely prove it?
No, but I can feel it.
Okay, but feeling is for you, not necessarily for someone else. And we live in a world where a lot of people who believe in God, they don't seem to act always that way. So that's the best proof, maybe, that their belief, if God really exists right here, right in here, no person would ever sin, right? So where's the God that they believe in? So I don't give too much credence. To me, the mind is overrated, let's put it bluntly. You need a mind because it's like it processes information and it helps you avoid mistakes. It means if you start making the mind the beginning and end of everything, almost no decision in life would happen. People wouldn't fall in love, they wouldn't get married. Because if you really go strictly with brain, mind, there's always an argument against something. How do you know for sure to invest in this and not in that? There's always going to be an element of risk. There's always going to be an element of uncertainty. And sometimes you make a mistake too, and you learn. So I've come to the conclusion that it's not proofs or disproofs that really matter that much. It's much more what I like to call experiential proof. If I see, for example, a system that makes a marriage work better, and there's healthier approaches to life and attitudes, and people are caring and loving and not selfish, and it works, that fact that it works to me is a bigger proof than anything you put on paper. Because you can put all the formulas on paper, and if it doesn't work, in actuality, it's a theory. So when I look at Judaism, and that's what I would encourage you to do, study its approach to life and what it does to people who, and not how people distort it. I'm not talking about how people interpret it for themselves. But what does the Torah actually say about, let's say, marriage, about children, about education, about God for that matter? And if that standard is one, especially if you compare it to others, a working system that really creates a healthy human being, and one that can actualize himself or herself, to me that's stronger than any scientific proof. That would be my main response. Now, the fact of the matter is, Judaism is here now around 3,800 years from Abraham, in pretty much an unbroken chain. I always see in advertising, they say, brewing beer since 1870. Or we're in the furniture business for 70 years. That's 70 years, 100 years. 3,800 years is a long time. So from a purely business point of view, if something's been around that long, they must have been doing something right. Now again, is this absolute proof scientific? No, but to me this is the most important. That's how I would approach it. Now there are other things that can be said, but I would stick to this, because to me, if you come away with this, there are people who come with it, there's a proof. How do you know George Washington existed? How do you know anybody existed? You never saw them. So the general historical proof is that if there are enough eyewitnesses who documented when that person lived, and they put it into newspapers and books, you assume that's proof. Or else you don't know anybody existed, because no one alive today lived 100 years ago or 500 years ago. Now, you could always say, maybe there was a conspiracy that a bunch of people made up, that there's a George Washington or there's an Aristotle, and it was a fictional character. He never existed. You could argue that. You have no absolute proof, because no one's around from then that could say that I trust completely. So the same you can say with the Torah, that there were millions of people at Mount Sinai, and they shared with their children that this is what happened, and no one ever contradicted that until 3,000 years later. The people who didn't like what it says in the Torah, wasn't convenient. But you didn't hear ever anyone saying it didn't happen. Now, I'm sure you could find rebuttals to that too. So maybe there was a conspiracy, or maybe the people who did say that were not documented. There's a lot of things you can say. That's why I didn't really go with that, because even if that's an acceptable proof, are you going to live your life by the Torah because Washington existed, or because the Torah was given at Sinai? I don't think that's going to be enough, personally. But if it makes your life work the best possible way, and I'll put it this way: if you buy a computer and you have an operator's manual that tells you that the engineer of this computer told you, when you do this and this and this with your smartphone or with your computer, it'll work at its best. If you do the wrong thing, you'll destroy it. So the Torah is a blueprint for life that the Creator said, the engineer of existence said, when you do ABC, do these mitzvahs, you will you'll perform at your best. And if you do other things that are not good, it will be destructive. So the proof is in the pudding. Does the machine work better? Does it not work? That's how I would respond to this question. And I hope I don't. Now I want to return the favor. I hope I don't put you on the spot now, because this may cause you. Now you have to go test it out now.
We have another question.
Okay.
But we have other questions, so we want to be fair. And it's also for Bringen. We want to hear about Basi Lagani, and Rabbi Jacobson, I'm sure, has other things he wants to share. So, but there's someone who feels very strongly want to ask a question. I think it's a fair question. It's a nice question. What is one common truth from the Rebbe that has echoed in your soul since you learned it, that you believe after so many years is a truth that all people should hear, especially Jews who have strayed away from the path or forgotten who they are?
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, it's a long question. What is one common truth, some important truth from the Rebbe that you learned that is resonated in your soul, that you believe is a truth that all people should hear, especially Jews who have strayed or forgotten who they are?
I would repeat what I said earlier, I think is the most important statement of all, that you were put in this world for a purpose, and the greatest thing you need to do in your life is to find out why you're here, and then how to actualize that mission in this lifetime. And this is universal for people of all walks of life. Jews are not Jewish, men, women, children, and there's no one in this world that's excluded from that. That would be my simple answer.
So very quickly, is this working? Oh. So very quickly, my son got married 2 years ago in Yerushalayim. My son got married 2 years ago in Yerushalayim, and on the day of the Chasana, there was a huge demonstration at Binyanei Uma, right across from the Egged bus station. And my son said, "Look, Todd, let's go check it out." I go, "What do you mean check it out? You're getting married." So I seated him. So we looked. There's a big thing that said on it, "Anu rotzim liot am normali." Kachol levan. I don't know what it is. It's some kind of party. Basically, we want to be a normal people, like the rest of the nations of the world. So my son, he's a yeshiva bacher, he didn't bat an eyelash. He went to the guy in charge and says, "Mama, Kavana, what do you mean?" He goes, "What do you mean, what do we mean? We're sick of being not normal. We want to be normal." So my son said, "We're not normal." Your thoughts?
I would tell your son to speak for himself.
My son, I know him pretty well. I consider him always pretty normal. Hold it for 3 seconds. In other words, it's not normal to be Jewish, basically. It's not a normal thing.
I mean, the word normal is a very relative term. What does normal mean? I mean,
Everybody else is eating a ham and cheese sandwich, and we can't. Well, that's not normal.
anyway, the Greeks of old felt it was humane that if a child was born handicapped or in any way impaired, that you should kill that child. Because out of compassion for the child and for the family and so on. They called that normal. The Jewish people refused, and they saw that as barbaric. So just because some people call something normal doesn't make it normal. So that's my response. I mean, who defines what normal is? When we were in high school, there was this book called The Lottery, short story. I don't know if you ever read that story, where a city had a certain custom that was the people just did without thinking twice. It's pretty horrific. I don't even want to repeat it, but they basically, once a year, they make a whole event, and all the children dressed up. It was like a holiday. And they all gathered. It was gathered in the middle of the town. School was closed, like major holiday. And they all stood in a circle, and they would throw a lottery. Everybody put their name in a hat. They would pick out one person, and that person would be put in the middle of the circle and be stoned to death. All without any drama. That was it. And everybody went home. So I remember when we finished the story, the teacher asked us, "So what do we learn from this?" that what somebody call normal doesn't mean it's normal, just means that just a lot of people are doing it. You know, we answer, Avodei atam v'lo avodei la'avodim. We're servants of God, not servants of servants. Doesn't matter how many people. Everybody bowed to Haman. Mordechai refused to bow. So he was not the normal one. But being normal is not always necessarily the way to go. That's my general response.
I want to ask you an open-ended question. Can you describe a Farbrengen by the Rebbe?
This is a loaded question. You could also describe it. Okay, I will.
I just want to say that at the Farbrengens, so there were tables set up and benches, long rows of tables and benches. So the Rebbe set up on a platform. If you see the pictures, the Rebbe set up on a platform. And behind the Rebbe, there were some elders sitting. And then on all the sides, right in front, below the platform, there were long tables. And there were bleachers on both sides and thousands of people standing there. So right in front of the Rebbe, there was they called it the shvil. There was an empty space, an open space, a path. So people get through right in front of the Rebbe. I stood the second person. We all had regular places. I stood the second person. So the path was empty, and then behind the end of the path, people stood. So it was Benji Stock. If you see all the pictures of by the Farbrengen, Benji Stock guy with the red beard standing there, I stood right behind him for several years. To my right, that first bench, Rabbi Jacobson sat. I used to watch him focusing and listening to the Farbrengens. Anyway, please describe a Farbrengen.
You weren't looking at the Rebbe? Both. Okay, I got it. Yeah.
1 second, it was like this. You got peripheral vision. It's off.
Well, I think if you asked, let's say at a Farbrengen of the Rebbe's, there would be a few thousand people at least. I think if you asked everybody, they would have a different answer. Some people were captivated by the songs, some by saying l'chaim to the Rebbe that moment, some by the ideas that the Rebbe shared, and the ideas themselves were of different shades and colors, of different, the whole spectrum. And then there was just the whole presence, just being in that environment. Like expression Chassidim would always say, you felt a tefach, like a lifted up an inch or two higher than the earthiness that we're so consumed with so often. So that itself was like an elevated state. Even if you didn't understand everything that was going on, it was just, it's like being in a holy moment, a holy space. For me personally, it was a combination of all the above. And I can describe the technical picture, but it was I'll just share from my heart some feelings. I often felt that the Rebbe was like sitting and looking at things from behind a curtain that we don't see, but we see him, and he's sharing the secrets of what he sees, Ma'acheri HaPargud, behind the curtain, sharing with us. It's like someone that sees something, and you see him, and he's telling you what he sees. I always felt it was a type of higher reality, deeper perspective on life, on everything, on existence, that the Rebbe would communicate. And sometimes it was so overwhelming for me, emotionally. Because when you contrast it with everything else you do in life, people are busy with all kinds of stuff. Some of it is petty, some of it is nonsense, and even important things. But that type of relentless Farbrengen sometimes that would go hours and hours. So besides, I'm not even getting into the message, just that intensity. I remember when I was around maybe 16, 17 years old, my parents rented for the summer a house Bell Harbor in New York. There's Bell Harbor, like if you know New York, Atlantic Ocean, you go down Kings Plaza, that down all the way, you hit the ocean. It's the area called Bell Harbor near Rockaway. And they rented a house close to the water. So I was in 770, but I would go there sometimes at night, when you want to eat your mother's dinner and feel a little nurtured. So I went out a few times, but I remember one particular time I went out to the ocean. It was like 11 o'clock at night probably. And you stand by the ocean, it's like, it's an experience. The ocean never stops. And as a kid, I'm 17, I remember watching the waves keep going and going and going. And I was waiting to see maybe the waves go to sleep for a few minutes or not. So I waited literally till the sun rose. And I was so taken because in Chassidus it talks about that sometimes, we talked before about infinity, sometimes you see God's infinite power in the sheer persistence of something, that it's relentless, it doesn't stop. And the ocean is a perfect example. The waves, they keep coming and coming again and again and again. And that was one of the first times, I hope you don't mind me, waxing a little poetic here. But I'm telling you my hergish, For me, that was one of the first times I felt that was the Rebbe by Farbrengen, called Mayin HaMizgaber, a overwhelming, a overpowering wellspring. And you saw it. It was this, I remember Yutas Kislev Tovshin Lamed Hey. It was the year 1974 probably. It was the end of 74. And the Rebbe then was made a sim on the Rambam. The first time, a long sim. It was a sikha. The Rebbe started to make a sim on Masechta Tamid. Okay, the Rebbe made every major Farbrengen. The Rebbe made a sim. Sim means that he ended a tractate in the Talmud and would explain it. But then suddenly you could see the Rebbe's face change, the demeanor changed, and he suddenly went into the Rambam, and this became a maybe 2.5 hour talk. I don't remember the length. It was very long, longer than anything. But it wasn't the length. It was this. The Rebbe suddenly opened up the gates, the floodgates, and so Jacobson was like, and the depth and profundity of it was unbelievable. I don't think anyone can grasp it all. That one, on the first, listening for the first time, but it was unbelievable. And I remember that feeling, the ocean, like this relentlessness, and what it does is, besides, again, the message, it shows that in this world there are people, or there one person, I would say, a tzaddik Yisei De'elam, that is embodying this is what matters. And no pettiness at all. There's no nonsense. There's not 1 second of frivolousness, nothing. It's all this complete focus and tremendous flow. So maybe we never can reach that level, but to me, these Farbrengens left such a deep impression. Again, I didn't even say one thing about what the Rebbe said of the Farbrengens. That today, for me personally, people ask me, how do you start a program? You do it every week, you never get. And I learned the power of waves in the ocean. You start something real and good, you don't stop. And not out of guilt, out of, you see something real, something is MS, this is what you do. It's not because you're always in the mood. You're obviously not always in the mood. But I don't know if the waves are also always in the mood. But that's what they're charged to do, and that's what we do. So to me, this will never cease. So though Gimel Tammuz came, and the sun stopped literally, like in the first Gimel Tammuz by Yeshua, the sun stopped in the heavens. Shemesh begiven Daim. So many ways, the Rebbe's words, those living words that would come every week by Farbrengen, we don't hear that quite, but the relentlessness and the nitzchias and the eternity of it is not compromised in the least. It's just now we have to be the ones that keep generating it and keep making it alive. because that's the mission we were given. So of course we would love that it should just happen from above, but that's the job. So this is some of my feelings on the matter. I don't think it can. I mean, there's videos today. You see Farbrengens and so on. Yeah, I capture some of it, but just this whole. I mean, it was like literally having a piece of eternity, a piece of a higher reality, for 5-6 hours, and that was that. Sometimes I walk into 770 these days, and I go to the places that major things happen. The Rebbe sat at Farbrengen here, and he danced here, and he this. There's something about nature that's also very sad, that it doesn't remind you. You could stand in the place where the Rebbe stood and was doing all this. I mean, you look now, you don't see anything the space conceals. Teva hides what's beneath the surface. It says, Mashiach comes, Eva Mekir Tizak. The stones themselves will cry out. So sometimes that's sad. That's something eternal you'd think should be crying out, that here's something unbelievable that happened. But I guess we have to be the ones that awaken it, and that's my natural. What should I say? Came from my heart. I don't know if that's what you were looking for. Chaim. Yo ya yam bida yam bam 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 bidim bam 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 bidi lai. You have issues with neighbors here? I'm just asking, sometimes you go to places.
We've had on Simple Third, we've had the police come at midnight.
Very nice evening. Are you cold? Yeah. Bam bam. Yeah. When Shazar came to the Rebbe the first time, it was Purim, freezing. It was like one of those. She told the Rebbe, I feel in the kälteste Älter, bei uns in Yisrael, guck nicht zu der Verfrorenkeit. In his Yiddish, he said. So the Rebbe said to him, der Fahr schickt man eine Schomme der Lamate zu umwandeln. So the Rebbe said, we have it on tape, a recording. It's beautiful. Because his Yiddish was as if verfroren, kept verfroren. Bam 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 bidim bam 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 balim bandoy. Chaim. I want to share something I saw. I know that all the Chassidish shluchim here. I'm sure you learned the Maimer. So the Rebbe talks about L'mayla aden ketz, L'mata mata aden tachlis. And later in the Hemshech, in the continuing discourse of Basi, the Frierdiker Rebbe explains that these two levels are both transcendent levels, but one is deeper than the other. And he gives an example the language of Chassidus, Kabbalah, one is makif aver chayzer, one is makif aver yosher. And he gives an example for each, that a teacher teaches a student. So even if he's teaching him Aleph Beis, the beginning and basic stuff, but in it is concealed much deeper. And ultimately, as the student grows and matures, he can learn to understand more as his containers expand. So even though things that were concealed and he didn't know, like, a child learning Aleph Beis doesn't know all the depth. But like the Rebbe, by 40 years, he begins to appreciate the deeper. So even though it was concealed, you can't say it's fundamentally off limits. But then he says there's a detz lamata mata adin tachlis. But then there's a level that's even higher than that, that's fundamentally concealed. It never will be revealed. And that's what he calls l'may l'mala adin ketz, the oitzer. The only time it's revealed is during a time of war, in order for victory, just to simply win. So one year, it was in 1986, it was the Shabbos after Shevat, Shabbos Pasha B'Shalach, where the Rebbe, interestingly and very uniquely, connected these two levels to the difference between the Baal Shem Tov and the Mezuzah Magid. And the process also explains the connection to Chabad, the Alter Rebbe, and all the Rabbeim. Now remember, in the Maimarim, the Rebbe would always quote all the Rabbeim, every one of the Basi Ligani Maimarim. So how did he explain this? He says like this, that the Baal Shem Tov was Lamay Lamay Adin Ketz, because the Baal Shem Tov, Baal Shem's Kamaisis, Baal Shem Tov behaved in many ways that was completely out of the ordinary, supernatural. So it's outside of the normal order of things. At the same time, the Baal Shem Tov also would go to each town and meet the simple Jews and children and elicit from them, they should say, Baruch Hashem, thank God, Aleip to the Eibishter. He would reveal the Etzem HaNeshama, the core of the soul, in every person. Not just scholars, but every individual. So this is the Lamay Lamay Adin Ketz, the Oitzer, that on one hand, completely beyond, things that were mysterious behavior, things that are beyond the normal routine. At the same time, also revealing that deepermost, the innermost dimensions of a soul. The Maggid, on the other hand, began to already explain the ideas of Chassidus, even though it was still Nekudus, it was still short and brief, but it's already a Helam that relates, a transcendence that relates to the Alter Rebbe, Chabad, and we'll call it the conscious faculties. And the Rebbe says, it's famous in the Sichos, it says about the Rabbeim that the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid were Keser, the Baal Shem Tov Atik, the Maggid Arich, the Alter Rebbe's Chochmah, the Mittel Rebbe Bina, Tzemach Tzadik Das, and so on. So it's interesting, because what exactly the Rebbe trying to say with this? Clearly giving us like a deeper understanding of what Chassidus came to accomplish. So to use a simple example, when you ask someone to speak about something superficial and shallow, like the weather or sports, people can talk about it forever. Just turn on talk radio and you'll see. Endlessly. The weather channel. I remember when the weather channel came out, they have 24-hour weather. People said, crazy, who's interested in weather 24 hours? It was a huge success. The weather channel. And, different theories, maybe because people love to talk about nothing, So you could talk and talk and talk and talk. If someone asks you, tell me something that you feel deep in your heart, you'll find you have very few words. which seems paradoxical. If it's close to you, really close, you should be able to talk about it. If it's something that's superficial, how much can you talk about the weather or about whatever, trades and off-season, on-season, whatever people talk about? And the answer is, this is the answer. With another example, now look at the human body. Wherever there's more energy, there's less containers. The head, the human head, contains all the most of the faculties. The brain, the vision, eyes, ears, nose, mouth. And yet it's the smallest part of the body. As you travel down, let's say the torso, the chest, so yes, there's the heart, there's the lungs, and the liver, but they're not as primary as the organs, and the torso is much larger. And the legs, which is half the body, has the least amount of faculties. So Chassidus says, wherever there's more oir, there's less keli. Wherever there's more keli, there's less oir. So when it comes to speaking, words are containers. And containers can only contain, in this cup, I can only pour that much water in. If you want to express something really so shallow, superficial stuff, no problem, you could talk all day. You want to talk about something deeper, liba lepuma legalia. The heart, you can't really express in your lips with words. That's why people say, I don't have words for it. It was an experience beyond words, beyond expression. I can't tell you how much I love you. I can't tell you how much you help me, etc. So, because words are containers, and the containers have limits. So what do? We create a language called metaphor, like a moshel, or poetry, or song for that matter. A song, kulmas alev, kulmas hanev, suddenly a song can express a lot more than any words. One song. Because it's a different language. It's like the containers are broader. So therefore it's also more edel, more refined containers, so it can express deeper feelings. And then as you go deeper into the soul, sometimes an oy vey, or just a cry, or a laugh, can capture more than a whole book. Same reason. Until the point that the Zohar says about Tkiyas Shefer, we know there's the Tkiyas, there's the Shvarim, the Truas, which all, by the way, are connected to this, that the deeper you go, the less sound there is, that there's a kola delay shtama, a voice that can't be heard. And the Zohar says that's the strongest voice of all. It's so powerful that even sound itself is too much of a keli. So it's through silence. The Kahanim served silence. The Levim sang. So the Zohar says, which is greater? So it says the silence of the Kahanim is deeper than the sound of the sound and song of the Levim. You know, Moshel Chassidus says, like a wise person, where do you see more his wisdom? When he speaks or when he's quiet? So everybody, someone in less experience is going to say when he speaks. Not true. It's when he's quiet. The places that he didn't speak. Why didn't he answer the question? Or why did he keep the answer so limited? That in the silence you could see a lot deeper. In the language of Chassidus about the tzimtzum harish, the tzimtzum, God concealing himself reveals more about God than God revealing himself. Because revealing, that's natural. You reveal. But to be able to withhold and restrain, that comes from a deeper strength. So the question is, can we actually access that deeper place within us that's completely beyond? So until the Gilia Primus Atera, only Yechidus Gula, only individuals could reach that level. Rashbi, Arizal, Ramban, the Kabbalah in all the generations. That's why Kabbalah wasn't studied by everybody. Nigla, you want to serve God? No problem. God tells you, here's the mechanics of mitzvahs. This is what you should do, what you shouldn't do. Learn about it, understand the reasons, everything. But the deeper workings, we can't access that because we don't have the containers to access such deeper levels. But once the Arizal came, the mitzvah legalizes hachachma, the mitzvah now to reveal this inner wisdom, and then more accelerated by the Baal Shem Tov, your Futzma and Sechel Chutza, and the Magid, and then of course the Alter Rebbe in Chabad, in a full Yisparnus Menei, in a full expansive way, So what's the real Kiddush ultimately, the real contribution? Not just we're learning more ideas, that suddenly things that were once unspoken and impossible to speak about are being revealed. Which of course, if you think about it, really is also reflects Lamaila, godliness, that you can reveal the revealed parts of God or godliness, and there's the concealed parts. And the concealed remains concealed. And yet, the Baal Shem Tov came and he began creating a bridge. So the Rebbe is saying is that the Maimer Bas Legani, when you think of it in that context, it really gives us a whole picture of the whole contribution of what Chassidus is. That the Baal Shem Tov came to reveal this most thing that's fundamentally concealed that can be now accessed. And the way it appears from that Maimer, B'Shalach Memvav, 1986, that the Magid is the next bridge, because he bridged it from the Baal Shem Tov to Arich, is already relates more to the Netzalim, to the emanations. And the Alter Rebbe turned it into, of course, a whole system where Bislapshus comes into Chabad. The Rebbe speaks about that also there in those Memorim. I just thought that it's a very powerful way of understanding, why we need to learn these things. It could be when Jews were living in a very insulated and isolated environment, and there wasn't much assimilation. There were there were no influences from outside. So yes, there was a certain naivete, but you didn't need to dig that deep to access these higher levels, these deeper levels. But now when there's a war and there's real adversity that requires digging deeper, so the Baal Shem Tov and the Magid and the Rabbeim came to accomplish that. And I say it also in context of our own shlichus, wherever we are. So whether it's here in Palo Alto or the other cities that you hear, or shluchim anywhere in the world, we're not just here to build a shul. I'm not minimizing that, or a school, and awaken Jews to do Yiddishkeit and non-Jews Sheva Mitzvahs Bnei Neach. That's a given. There's something deeper. The Rebbe made it very clear that your futza meinesecha, chutza meinesecha, that the goal is to reveal the deepest part of a person, the parts that are completely concealed at times. And that is equal to everybody, because even a Tinnik Shenishba, even someone that did not grow up with Judaism or education, like the Baal Shem Tov, he has that etzem and neshama. And that in essence maybe is the deeper, well, not maybe, based on these Mamorim, is the deeper meaning of these chapters of, as the Rebbe said many times, that this Maimer, Bas Legani, has the answers to all the questions. Because since it's the last Maimer of the Frierdiker Rebbe, and you see how the Rebbe every year, that had Bavor and Alts. So if you really want to have direction, besides the fact right in the beginning it says Deir Ashvi, Kol Ashvi and Chavivin, 7th generation, and what our mission is, as the Rebbe explained in that first Bas Legani. But even the other chapters all have different elements that I think is like endless lessons in Shlichus, in our mission, in what this generation is supposed to be doing. So when you learn the Rebbe's Maimorim on chapter 12 and later chapters, I think it's not just the Rebbe giving an explanation, it's also explaining it for our generation, because you see the Rebbe keeps focusing in these Maimorim about being Megal, the Etzem. Always talking about the Etzem, not just high levels, to reveal the essence of everything, the essence. So you think of it that way, it's like it's also a directive of what we should be doing. And it's a tremendous thing, because there's a famous example from the Baal Shem Tov, beautiful example, where he asks why Tfilah La'ani, pray like a pauper. Lifnei Hashem Yishpech Sichi. So he gives the example, wipe like a pauper. 2 people were invited to see a king, and one was a educated, literate aristocrat. He knew a scholar, a pious person. And the other was a simple person, a peasant, a pauper, didn't know anything, illiterate, he couldn't even read. So comes the sophisticated one, the literate one, and he comes to this palace. He never saw such a palace. And because he appreciates it all, he gets busy, he gets distracted by the literature, by the music, by the art, by just the grandeur of it all. He misses his appointment, as the Baal Shem Tov puts it. Then comes the other one. He doesn't know anything. He goes through all these chambers. He doesn't even know what it means. And he goes into the inner sanctum and spends his time with the king. So the Baal Shem Tov says, when you're standing before the king, before God, Melech Malcham Lochem HaKadosh Baruch Hu, suspend your sophistication and your intelligence and stand like a pup, like a child. Because then you're getting the very essence of the king, not just his glory, not just the sizzle, but the steak, not just the fireworks. And then you can ask for everything, and you could also ask for what Chassidus calls the Giluyim. The example really captures something that is that was being lost, and that's why the Baal Shem Tov came to reveal it. That we can talk about many, people, all kinds of stuff that how they present and project, and it's all beautiful. But what's going on at the core of a person, all the way in the core essence? So it's actually the opposite, that all these Giluyim, all these revelations, all these expressions and sophistications can actually conceal and not allow us access that place. So that's the beauty of sincerity, of just a simple act. The kukuriku story with the Baal Shem Tov, the child, the farm boy, didn't know anything else. He just knew how the call of a rooster. And that can pierce heavens more than all the prayers. So this is not an ode, an endorsement of illiteracy. It just means that sometimes a literate person has to suspend some of their literacy if they want to experience the real thing. I was always talking about Farbrengens. The Rebbe always would walk with his siddur, and with his prayer book everywhere. Siddur. I heard from my father-in-law that in the early years before the Nesius, so the Rebbe, the same thing, always a siddur. So there was once a chassid. My father was there upstairs. The Rebbe finished davening, and he went over to speak to the Rebbe. And he I can't say he was making fun, but he was like trying to be a little cynical. He says to the Rebbe that two things. Well, the two things. The Bechlal Chassidim, we saw they were Meidach in davening by Krishma, Shemoneh Esrei. But you never saw someone be Meidach by Aleinu. The Rebbe was Meidach by Aleinu. He saw the Rebbe be Meidach in Aleinu. Making a very long davening. The second thing, that Bechlal people walk with Hasidim was always seen as the simple people. Who walks with Hasidim? Anyway, my father-in-law and a few other Bochum were standing there. The Rebbe wasn't a Rebbe then. He was a Ramash. It was a shtickle chutzpah. And the Rebbe said to this guy that someone once came to the Ragachover and said to him, I see you put on 2 pairs of tefillin, Rashi and Bein Hatam. So Mela, most of us, we don't know who's right, because we're simple people, but you're a gon. You know who's right, Rashi or Bein Hatam. So why do you put on 2 pairs of tefillin? So the Ragachover answered, do in my inyanim zosach nishmishin. You don't get involved in my matters. That's how the Rebbe responded to this guy. Now, they asked the Rebbe once, what's his favorite prayer? So I heard that the Rebbe said, Moida Ani. Which makes sense. You see, in Yonash Teres Achsidis, Yiteskis of Chavav, the Rebbe's Koch, took a simple prayer, like, deceptively simple. Well, you'd think, Moida Ani, it's what we say with children. It's the first prayer. Not Shema. And there's tefillas that are, Moida Ani is considered to be the beginning of the journey, but the etzem is always found in the simple, not in the big glamorous stuff. And so yes, that's simple, holding the siddur. However, I'm not going to go explain why the Rebbe didn't do it, but don't underestimate. Sometimes these simple things carry the deepest etzem. I was always taken, there's no note from every note that Rebbe ever answered anybody. And I looked for this far and wide. Does not always has one answer, one everything's something in common at the end of every answer. Actualizing, right? It became so common that we just take it for granted. that I'll mention it at the tzion, at the oil. And you see, by all the Rabbeim, you don't see that answer. I mean, you have at times the Rabbeim will say, I'll read your pan, but literally every answer. And sometimes you see those pictures of the Rebbe, the oil, from the early years until later years. You know, the Rebbe standing and by his Rebbe. And I always found that the Rebbe couldn't communicate with the Frierdiker Rebbe from his room. If you can communicate with the oil, you can communicate from the room too. But that's not our cheshbon. We don't know the Rebbe's mises. You know, but there's something, I always found it to be, again, like a certain, what's the word I want to use, profound, I don't want to use the word humility, but that total bittul, standing hours and hours, and every answer, Actualizing, is like, in many ways, there's much more greatness there than you see the Rebbe's own greatness, so to speak. I remember Purim, Tov Shemam Gimel. It's a very interesting sikha there. I don't know if any of you ever heard it. It's worthwhile listening to. The Rebbe says, those few times the Rebbe speaks about himself. Purim Mem Gimel, this is like later years, 83. The Rebbe says like this, that from time to time, from time to time one wonders whether one is doing the right thing. He's talking about the Rebbe, he's talking about himself. Whether one is doing the right thing. And I mean, the way the Rebbe speaks is very berem, is very, you can't really pick it up right away. But if you listen to the whole thing, you see what the Rebbe wondering. So why are we being matriach? Why are you causing people to come out from their homes, to come listen to one person Farbrengen on Purim? Everybody could stay home and learn and daven and Farbrengen. Why everyone be matriach? Bother everyone to come to listen to one person. Now, mind you, the Rebbe didn't force anyone to come. Everybody who came wanted to come. But the Rebbe is wondering why he's allowing that to be. And again, it's not 1951, 50. It's 1983. And what does the Rebbe answer? The Rebbe says, so where do you find an answer? You get some Rebbe. You have to get an answer from the Rebbe. So the Rebbe told the story that he said then that he didn't hear from the Frierdiker Rebbe, but there's another Farbrengen where he did. Shavuos Yud Gimel, I think he also spoke about it. Anyway, the Rebbe said that the Alter Rebbe was once in his house, and he sees out the window, the Chassidim are all coming. Like a lot of Chassidim coming, they're coming to hear the Alter Rebbe, they want to hear something. So the Rebbe said these words, he said so the Alter Rebbe right away was going to go to close the curtains and lock the door. The Rebbe's words are, the Rebbetzin, the Alter Rebbe's wife, hat gleich gesehen, am darf da etwas tun, soll sein a gutes Sof. That's what the Rebbe said. To do something, there should be a good ending. No, the Rebbe's not good. So she says to the Alter Rebbe said like this, says, was willen sie von mir? What do they want from me? And he went to close the curtains and the door. So the Rebbe said to the Alter Rebbe, sie willen hören, was euer Rebbe hat zu sagen. They want to hear what your Rebbe has to say. So Alter Rebbe suddenly changed his whole position. And he said, if that's the case, I'll say and I'll say. And he opened the door, and they came in. In another sikh, it says, he said, Ateiran Kisove. It was around Pasha Kisove. So the Rebbe said the following. He says, the Alter Rebbe said it Mitzad Anova. His humility, that's why he said it. So the same Alter Rebbe who Kalemerisht, or Kavyochel, writes that Tanya is Mipisofrim, Mipisefrim. Alter Rebbe on the cover page, he says that this book is taken from books and authors and writers, as if like it's some type of liquid, like some type of compendium. When it's full with Kiddushim, every line is saturated with Kiddushim. The Rebbe says the same Rebbe, the same Anivus. He says, the Rebbe speaking about himself, he says, but here we don't need that Anivus, but the Ashgocha Prat is that this and this person, the Rebbe meant himself, heard from the Shver, from the Frierdiker Rebbe. So by Mela, people are coming to hear was ein Rebbe hat zu sagen. That's how the Rebbe answered the question. Now, the Rebbe's not playing a game of humility here. Like he said about the Alter Rebbe, it's Anivus. Why would the Rebbe need to say this to us? 2 years later, Yud Alef Nisan Tov Shemem Hey, similar This is a televised Farbrengen. I remember when I heard it, I was like, I couldn't believe the Rebbe said it. Right at the beginning of the televised Farbrengen, Yud Aleph Nisan, the Rebbe's birthday, 1985. The Rebbe says, Reish is going up, you do what it says in Chassidus. Chassidus makes such a tumult about gaiva, arrogance. Amalek, Reish is going Amalek, there's nothing worse than arrogance. So how is it possible that everybody's coming to celebrate the birthday of one individual? That's the Rebbe asked. On a televised Farbrengen, not a Shabbos. And again, the Rebbe has to say that. Who had this question? Nobody has such a question. And the Rebbe told a famous story with the Rav in a very distinguished city. They appointed a new rabbi. It happened to be this rabbi was very short physically. So some of the people in the city came to the rabbi rather, and said to the rabbi, it doesn't pass. It's not fitting for a city like a distinguished city like this to have a rabbi that's so short. So he answered, the mensch is after klein, but the benkel is grace. The person may be small, but the seat which he occupies is large. So the Rebbe said, we're not talking about an individual, we're talking about the tenuah, the movement of Chabad. Now I know that some very mukushar may see this as a little sacrilegious, but let me say this. Huh? You don't know what sacrilegious means? Yeah, I know my guys, yeah. By saying a disclaimer, then you could say anything, right? When Moshe Rabbeinu was told, Lech Reid, so the Eibishter said, Klum, Gedula, I gave you greatness not for you, I gave it for the people. What the Alter Rebbe was saying, what the Alter Rebbe didn't know that he was Mechadish Chassidus Chabad, he didn't have self-recognition, and that the only way he's going to speak is as was a Rebbe Hatzazog. But it's the same thing with Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe is, of all the things, the honor of Mekol Adam. Because they know that their strength is not in their greatness, their strength is in their bittul, and channeling something that's greater than they are. And I think that there's a distortion in this, even today, in discussions, people think making the Rebbe great is making the Rebbe great. No, the more the Rebbe is saying, was I Rebbe Tzazogin, the greater he is. And that is the biggest chidushim. It comes hand in hand, it's not a stira. Unfortunately, sometimes you hear people, they think it's some type of popularity contest between the Rebbe and the other Rabbeim, which is, to me, it's shtusim gmurim. It's based, I believe, on insecurities and distorted views. But I'm not going to go into the politics of it. Sometimes an insecure person, the only way you can be secure is you say, my rabbi is the greatest, The Rebbe, in Shabbos Vayetze, Yud Kislev, he said that he was asked the question why in all the Sforim of the Rabbeim it says on top, Shalshelas Ha'oir. If you look in all Sforim of the Rabbeim, Shalshelas Ha'oir, and the Rebbe made the cover pages, the Shablots and everything. The Rebbe said, our Rebbe is Moir. Should say Shalshelas Ha'oir. Why say Shalshelas Ha'oir? A Rebbe is the luminary, is the source, not the reflection, the Oir. And the Rebbe said, because in Moir, nishtakin ishtalshlus. In Moir, it's an etzem. In etzem, there's no shalshalas, there's no chain, there's no evolution, there's no stages. It's all one. In Teira Shalom, it says that the Alter Rebbe lived among Tanoi in time of Tanoim, he would have been a Tana. If he lived in the time of Meroim, he would have been a Meir. If the Alter Rebbe lived today, he would have been the Rebbe. And the Rebbe would have lived in the Alter Rebbe, he would have been the Alter Rebbe. And etzem is an etzem. In Giluyim, in the Eir, in the reflection, so the Alter Rebbe is Chochmeh, Mittler Rebbe is Bina, Tzemach Tzadik Das. That's already in their form of expression. Obviously, every Rebbe fitting to his generation. But there's a certain atzmi in it. And I'll share something, just it's at my own detriment, but why not? Yeah? It's one of the answers that I got from the Rebbe that was... I have l'chaim, yeah. That's fine. L'chaim, l'chaim. I'll sing a nig and then I'll tell the story. Okay, l'chaim. L'chaim. I'm fine. I'm fine. Oh, yana, yana, na, yano, yana, na. Yo, yano, yano. Yo, yano, yo, yanara, yana, yana. Ay, 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 yo, ay. Ya, 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 yo, yano. Oy, yanara, yarara, yo, yana. Oy, yanara, yo, yana, yana. Oh, no, no, yo, yana, yana, na, yano, ya. Yo, yana, na, yo, yano. Oh, yanara, yarara, yo, yana. Oh, ya, yano. Oh, yanara, yo. Yana, yana, yano. Oh, yana, yana, yano, ya, yana, ana, yo, yano, diri, ya, yana, na, yana, na, yana, yo, yana, yana, ay, ay. Oh, you know, you know, you know. L'chaim, l'chaim. Yeah. So, which, as you know, you may know, I had the discourse to do this for a good 16, 17 years. I worked in Anochis. The Sefer HaSichos, Tavshin Mem Zayim, Mem Ches, Mem Tezra. But even the early years, so the job was quite complex, quite difficult and challenging to remember hours and hours of these talks and then retain it, absorb it, and ultimately write it down, annotate it. So one of the most popular, questions you hear from people are always asking me, what was the process like, and what was the Rebbe's involvement? So, even though the Rebbe did not edit all the talks, but firstly, many of them he did, and then but he answered many, many questions. And while I was doing this work, which was basically from 1977, 78 till 1992, so I have to say I tried to exploit the situation as much as I could and ask every possible thing. I felt if you have access to the Rebbe, might as well go for it. And sometimes you got unbelievable answers, and sometimes you got a flick. You know what a flick is? Like an admonishment. Hmm? I know. Well, I could say almost every week we got some form of admonishment, but I don't use that word at all. It's not what I would call. It's more chesed shebechesed, meaning that in the process of educating us and training us to really capture an idea well, the Rebbe was like a surgeon with a scalpel, every nuance. Today, I learned so much from it because, I learned how every word matters, every nuance, every gray area. How many times the Rebbe would actually take something that was seemingly very black and white, and the Rebbe turned it to gray, wanted it to be more ambiguous. Different words. I'll give you examples. So in the process, by the Rebbe, if there was something to drop off, it was big. So the Rebbe had a word, mavil. It was a very favorite word of the Rebbe. The word mavil in Hebrew means shocking. Shocking. Mavil, shocking that you could even write something like this. Now the Rebbe, in his expressive manner, sometimes the mavil would be underlined, sometimes twice, sometimes 6 times. And that's not enough. Sometimes it would be followed by a question mark and exclamation point, and sometimes 3 question marks and 3 exclamation points. So it's a separate study of its own, all the different levels of mavil, of shocking. But I could tell you that if you saw what the Rebbe wrote shocking was not what you and I would think is shocking. It was on the standard of the Rebbe. Just to give you one example. In one Sikha once, the Rebbe, there's a famous story of Rabbi Nachum Chernobyl, where he had 2 different, he has a sum of money, should he give it to one person, should he break it up to many people? But then he also brought the idea that sometimes the thing you resist most, that's what you should do. That's where the Yetzer Hara is. And that we wrote the story. The Rebbe said in the Farbrengen, we wrote it. On the side, the Rebbe wrote Mavil. that Chosser Maimer Chazal Mefurish, that this is really a explicit statement in the Talmud. Now, again, the Rebbe wrote it, but till then the story was told hundreds of times, and no one ever brought this Maimer Chazal. So, but the Rebbe was so obvious, that so glaringly blatant that it's missing. And what was the Maimer Chazal? Oye v'seina seina kedem. By the Rebbe, this was a beferish. So it says that when you have to help somebody, and someone that you love, and someone that is your enemy, you help the one that is your enemy. So by the Rebbe, that was a beferish Maimer Chazal, that the thing you resist most, you have to do. Well, now it's true, once you hear it, but that means you have to read a Maimer Chazal like the Rebbe reads. That's what he expected from us. And there's many, many examples. The one I wanted to share was, yeah, why not? I think I'm old enough already. So there was a Farbrengen, was actually a huge Shevat Farbrengen, connected. Shabbos Pasha Boy, Cheshvat, Tovshim Vov. So we're talking about 1986. So it was Shabbos. So the Rebbe connected Cheshvat with Yud Shvat, because the Gemara says in Seta that on this day, the 8th of Shvat, Mesu Ziknei Zkenim Shebedar of Yeshua. The time of Yeshua, the Zkenim, the sages, they passed away on the 8th of Shvat. So the Rebbe connected. So then Shabbos that benches Yud Shvat, it's also Istalkus HaTzadikim. There it says Zkenim, many, and the Frierdiker Rebbe was one. So the Rebbe said, because the idea that there was one Rebbe and not many is Mitzachson Hadar. Because the weakness of the generation, so it can't take more than one. But the truth is that the generation was a greater generation. You could have more than one leader. That's what the Rebbe said. Right away, I remember when I heard it, I said, oh, 1 second. This goes against all the rules that we were taught. Not Chad Rishon, questioning the Rebbe. I mean to say something, the Rebbe wanted us to ask these questions. So immediately Sunday morning, I wrote a note to the Rebbe. And we wrote always in a very obviously respectful way. And the Rebbe said so and so. First of all, we wanted to make sure we heard it right. Maybe we missed the point, maybe the nuance. And based if that's what we heard, now the idea that there's only one Rebbe in every generation, not beside the weakness of the generation, is because the etzem of the Rebbe. It's like there's one Kohen Gadol, there's one Moshe Rabbeinu, there's one Torah, there's one Eibishter. Like Rashi says by Kodesh. Not mitzadach son. The Achdus is one. And I actually quoted, I think it was maybe Yud Beis Tammuz Tov Shel Chofei. The Rebbe told a story, or maybe Vayetze Chofei. The Rebbe told the story that he asked the Frierdiker Rebbe once what was going on during the time of the Tzemach Tzedek, and the Chayev of the Mittler Rebbe. The Mittler Rebbe was still around. And the Chayev, the lifetime of the Mittler Rebbe. And the Tzemach Tzedek behaved like they say, he had some Rebbeische behavior. So he asked the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Rebbe said, "Ich gefragt dem Schwer." I asked my father-in-law, the Rebbe, Frierdiker Rebbe, what was going on. And the Rebbe said that the Asher geempfert, he called the Rebbe by his name, by his second name. He said, "Was redst du? Rebbe is not ein." What are you saying? A Rebbe is only one Rebbe. You know, even the Tzemach Tzedek, whatever, there's only one Rebbe. There's no two Rebbe. So I quoted that too. Anyway, this was already kriching a little too, but a component, we asked the question, and the Rebbe insisted such questions. If it was something that we had a question, the Rebbe told us, wrote many times to us, and said also by Farbrengen, I'm not interested in you not asking a question out of respect. Respect is when you ask a question. And then I decided, you know what, let me smuggle in another question related, and we'll see what happens. I wrote that maybe, according to the Rebbe's beer explanation, that it's only inside the weakness of the generation, can explain the big question, what will be when Mashiach comes and all the Rabbeim will be back, physically. So like, who's going to be the Rebbe? The Mittler Rebbe is the Alter Rebbe. Tzemach Tzedek's Rebbe is the Rebbe. So how's it going to work exactly? You know, it's one thing whenever the Rebbe, Zarech HaShemesh, Bar HaShemesh. So maybe the Rebbe is saying that once there's such big Giluyim, you can have more than one. Anyway, I knew this was not going to, I could either get a big frask, or maybe there'll be an interesting answer. So the Rebbe basically didn't answer all the questions. He only went straight to this. And the Rebbe wrote, "Be'eze snif tem chitmimim mepalpelim bedvarim dakim and adakim." In which department of Tem Chitmimim are they busy trying to analyze these very subtle matters? So I don't know if you want to call it a bitush. I didn't see it that way. I just felt, I thought that was our job. Our job was to try to elicit everything from the Rebbe. And I have to tell you, many times we were matzliach and the Rebbe gave entire explanations that came from questions. But that was that. So it's fine. I'm not afraid if you use it against me. I don't see it that way. I see it as a kiruv. If you want to know another time that Rebbe made latzonis from me personally, that's latzonis. It was a little comic, a little humor at my expense. Was Shabbos Chazain, Tarshim and Vov. So the Rebbe, the famous Torah of Rabbi Yitzchak, by Ditchever, that Shabbos Chazain, the Eibishter shows the Beis Hamikdash, the third Beis Hamikdash, to every Jew from a distance, in order to evoke Aguyim, our yearning. The whole mashal there, because the first one was a garment that got torn, second one, the child took it for granted and it tore. So this time he's going to show the Beis Hamikdash from a distance. So the Rebbe asked the famous question, what's the point of showing it if nobody sees it? And the Rebbe went through a whole series of back and forth that he can't say it's like the kruzim, that you also don't hear it, but it affects the mazel, sheb, and the. Anyway, it was a very complex answer. And it was like needling, like a needle, like trying to get, how do you say, not needling, how do you call it, like.
Discerning?
Yeah, whatever. Very thin line, because do you see it or don't you see it? Anyway, the way I wrote it, and I guess and the Rebbe read the way I wrote it, it came across that the point the Rebbe was making really that you see the results of it, that it's ma'ir tshuva. And b'meil it's like seeing the Beis Hamikdash. So I guess the way I wrote it was not clear enough. So the Rebbe wrote on the side, Kenira, Shareshim Shiyichya, Ro Ba'atzme, B'Shabbos Chazain, Tovshim and Vov, Tovshim and Hey, V'chulu, is Beis Hamikdash HaShlishi. In other words, the way it was written, it sounds like the Rebbe is saying, Nira, that the writer actually saw the third Beis Hamikdash this year, last year. So I always say, listen, Havamin and Tate is also, the fact that Rebbe said it, so it's already means that I could have maybe, but I didn't really do it. So these were all actually, I saw this all as kiruvim, to be honest. It was all positive. I will tell you, some people, without mentioning names, my colleagues, some could not deal with it. Because, if you have a fragile ego, let's put it this way, and thin skin, you get a good chelik from the Rebbe, can be, maybe I was more callous, or maybe the other way around. I saw this all as a learning experience. So the list goes on. What should I tell you? Every week we had this interaction with the Rebbe. I would ask questions without any limit. Sometimes 5 questions a day. But it was like Yechidus. We didn't go into the Rebbe, but through writing. And tremendous things that we learned in the process. What can I say? It was good to be part of it. It was like being Gan Eden. You send in a note to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe gives out an answer. I mean, even one time it's a big thing. Here we had it that was like, I never took it for granted, that I can tell you. It was something else. Sometimes I couldn't even sleep at night until I would hear the answer the next day, because there's some questions were like so obvious. But it was good. What can I say? It was very good.
Was there ever a time where you got a yechidus with the Rebbe just for yourself as a human being? Because you're working so hard for the man, and it's true with staff generally. Staff serve their employer, and they work very hard, and they see it as a duty, and it's a professional thing. But in a sense, the people that are closest to their employer don't necessarily get the same attention as even a stranger coming from halfway around the world that gets a yechidus or something. Not that that person's not important too, but I'm just curious to know if you.
So like you saw, I heard said before that Chabad is not a business, and the Rebbe is not a CEO. What I will say is this: there's that Maimon Chazal that says Schar mitzvah mitzvah. The greatest reward of a mitzvah is the mitzvah itself. For me, the greatest reward was just doing the work and having this access and being able to ask the questions. I consider myself a mature adult. I didn't need hand holding and babysitting. There were people who wrote to the Rebbe that they need the Rebbe to smile to them, or else they'll have a bad week or whatever. I was not one of those. Actually, for me, it was the other way around. We have a professional relationship, and I didn't want to be in Yechidus with the Rebbe because that would make me more obligated, morally and spiritually. So I stay away from Holy of Holy, if you know what I mean. So I rarely wrote to the Rebbe about any personal matters. I felt the brachas came through the work, and I feel that way today too. And so I didn't need that at all. Really did not. There was one compliment I got my whole lifetime from the Rebbe about a sikha. And also, it was nice to hear, but the compliment the Rebbe wrote, Higdilu lases, and Vayikra Tovshem Zayin. So it's a mugadika sikha. So that's a strong statement. It's about nitzchis of Rabbeim, actually. It was a few months after Hey Tevis. Vayikra. Higdilu lases. But, honestly, I was not, no, I didn't. Not because I had no ego, it just was not, it was, doing this work, it was great, it was just, the work itself was so rewarding. And I felt the answers, what do I need more? To go to Yechidus to talk about what? We're going to talk about Shu Debris? What am I going to talk to the Rebbe about, if not the Torah of the Rebbe? And talk about my Yetzer Hara, that I decided, let me stick more to these things, and I'll let others. There was a debate when we were Bochrim. The Rebbe every year we'd go for our birthdays. Until 1974, you went every year for your birthday. I was 17, 74. But I remember when I was already 15, 16, I said to myself, why am I going to the Rebbe? I'm wasting the Rebbe's time. I go and we rewrite the notes from last year, basically. It was all automatic. And what you did in the Avodah, you're going to the Rebbe asking for the same brachas last year. And what you do about it, So I personally felt like I'm wasting the Rebbe's time. But I remember the Bochum in 77, there was the big debate about it. Some said, the Rebbe's your father, you go in naked, doesn't matter whether you prepared, you didn't prepare, whether you're worthy or not worthy, you go to the Rebbe. Like that, what some people said. And others said, what do you mean? You don't go into the Rebbe's time. Chassidim would once spend 3 years before they went. So I don't know if I go there. I was more in the school that, I don't know, I felt that I probably would not have continued going if the Rebbe continued. And lo and behold, what happens? Chayel, Tov Shalom Adal, the Rebbe says that the Bochum for birthdays no more are going to be Yechidus. And the Rebbe said those words, the Bochum kommt herein, the Zelba Parzuf, the Fariyar, the Gitim Abroche, the kommt noch ein Jahr, the Zelba Meise. The Rebbe Borla said it. But it's a debate, this is people, you could argue either way. Everyone has to make that choice. Well, sadly today we don't even have this choice. Everybody going to the oil equally. But we had these discussions, yeah.
I had to type
What year?
earlier, probably in Mumbai, something like that. And I sent it to the Rebbe.
Kedusha Sagilian, yeah.
I was so
I'll tell you one that actually, an answer that turned into a whole sugya directive, which is Mashiach. End of the day, Yud Shvat, Tov Shin Aleph, what was the main thrust of the Maimed? That we're the Deir HaShvi, And just like Moshe brought down the Shekhinah, then it's our job to do so now. The Rebbe set the stage, the tone for the whole Nesius. Very clear. And nobody could argue with that. You know, the arguments that go on about later years, but the Tafshin and Aleph, that's what the Rebbe said, the first Maimon, clear. Interestingly, the Rebbe didn't mention Der Ashvi very often after that. I looked once. You'll find it once or twice in 20 years. Yeah, Chosrin Chavim. Yeah, but the Der Ashvi, till later, in Memtes and Nun, the Rebbe came back to Der Ashvi a lot. Which is interesting, and these are the last marching orders that have still yet to be fulfilled. I'm sure everybody, every chassid, every shliach wonders, but it's already come to a point where, like, Kivin the Iflig, it's like, so 30 years we're talking about it, 28 years. Everyone says, so what it's going to be now? We already talked about it. It's either you know what to do, or we still don't know what to do, or whatever it is. And every few years there's another Yisraelis and another Miftzah and this and so on. The bottom line, we still have not achieved the intended goal, let's put it that way. So I think about this a lot all the time, because I remember actually when the Rebbe started very accelerating the tone about Higir Zman Gulaschem, the Gula is upon us, Shegendi de Berurim, Shetzuga puts the Kneplach, Im de Hochen Kulchem, Higir Zman Gulaschem. I mean, Effen de Egen, the world is ready. These were expressions repeated. You go in Tofshin Nun, Nun Aleph, Nun Beis, it's constant. And obviously, Leiber Shuftin Askina, but I just want to be shayla the Tachlis. Those people that say, I don't want to even use the word desperate or something, that the Rebbe was behaving in Shtusim Gmurim. First of all, Rebbe is a Rebbe. Shchina Medaberes Meter Gveine. In Tofshin Yud and Tofshin Nun Aleph, the same thing. And especially when you know what he said, Yud Shvat Tofshin Yud Aleph. It's not like suddenly in Tofshin Nun the Rebbe started talking about Mashiach. He already said it clearly, that's the Deir Ashvi. And so I want to share a few words about this. So maybe as a Gdomet, this is a Sikha Shabbos Pasha B'Shalach, Tov Mem Gimel. So the Rebbe said in the middle of the Sikha, middle of the Farbrengen, he said Mashiach is going to come. We already went through all the Gzeidas, already prophesied. More or less what the Rebbe said. Sunday, Mitzvah Shabbos, I couldn't ask questions. On Karker B'nai Sheis. So it says there, 2/3 of the world will be killed, or 2/3 of 2/3. We summarize what the Rebbe said, and then wrote Leita Fasno, Lehivano, Bli Neder Yeduba Bezeb Mitz Hashem, or Bli Neder Bisfadus Habo Aleinu L'Teva. Bisfadus Kiddush, Bisfadus Shabbos Kiddush Habo Aleinu L'Teva. There was no Farbrengen Yisroi that year. There was Farbrengen Mishpatim. And the second Sikha, I think.
What did he do about it?
We probably just left it. Yeah. Or maybe we waited. I can't remember now. I don't remember whether we waited at this. We may have waited. Anyway, Mishpatim, the Rebbe, as promised. Now, I knew when the Rebbe wrote that he has a lot to say in it, because if not, the Rebbe would answer, sometimes a long answer. The fact that the Rebbe says he'll speak about it, and that we like hit. And this was very not uncommon that we would write something and the Rebbe would turn it into a whole sugya. A lot of sikhs, by the way, more than you may imagine, came from a question, not from the Rebbe said something. The Rebbe sometimes actually said that I intentionally saying something in order to provoke, and nobody notices. The Rebbe said that too a few times. In one place, he once wrote to us, "I'm waiting 18 years for someone to chab the stira that you're asking me now." He intentionally put a stira in Topshin, whatever, like Topshin Yud Beis or something. He says he's waiting 18 years that somebody should catch it. Anyway, What does the Rebbe say? This was like, again, one of those shocking. I was taken so aback by this, in a good way. The Rebbe says, "Mit gefragt from Gemara about this thing whether Goyim will die or not, they're killed or not. Ukerogil, bekleibt sich nicht voneinander und versteht nicht, dass die Kasche ist auf der Gemara, nicht auf mir." That's what the Rebbe said. The question's on the Gemara, not on me. And the Rebbe explained why. It says, the Rebbe says, Chas al Maisa Yodov, or Rachem al Maisa Yodov. The creation of the people in the world are God's creations. He's Rachem al Maisa Yodov. How is he going to go kill 2/3 of his own people? So the Rebbe said. So I remember, to be in a concentrated mode to remember the Farbrengen, couldn't process it. I remember asking myself right away, I said, and how'd they learn the Gemara for 2,000 years? But the Rebbe, it was so mufrach, it was so not possible that it could mean that I saw that the Rebbe's approach to the world, to Goyim, is very different. No one has a problem. Every Goy is a potential Nazi, whatever. And the Rebbe went on, and this became a liquid. It's in the Likud Sichas today, look at Chelik of Gimel, Bolak, it's Chaka B'nai Sheis. You look at the end of the Sikh, you'll see it's B'shalach and Mishpadim, it's not a Bolak Sikh. So people wonder, why is it, what's Mitamol? Because it came from a question, and nothing to do with the Parsha. Anyway, and the Rebbe's Bekitzer, first he tried to answer that maybe they won't be killed, but their Koyach HaLeda will be taken away from them. So they won't give birth, so they'll die out. But the Rebbe, even that he says, that's also not rachim. How could you do something to people like that? Basically not let them. And the Rebbe, the answer at the end was that Karkir is not misa, it means bittul, that lefi, they'll become a new Metzias, or compared to the new Metzias, it's as if it's like in kashrus and things, you make something into a new Metzias. That's how the Rebbe answered. Now you'll say, how they learned till now? The Rebbe didn't talk about that, but Pashtus, well, till now, listen, if they are Amalek, or they behave in a way like that, but if Goyim are Chsidu Meseilom, or potentially, this is the Rebbe's explanation. Why am I saying it? Besides, it's interesting how the Sikha grew out of the question. You see, if we hadn't asked the question, I'm sure the Rebbe may have said the idea at some point, but he used it as an opportunity to explain an idea that most people would not understand that way. And I say this without everybody takes this the right way. I think that Chabad, even the most Chassidish Yidden, and the Lomdim don't know the Rebbe's approach to Umas Elam today. They think it's still the Umas Elam of Sof Perek Aleph of Tanya. Because that's a simple klotz kasha. How could the Rebbe say the world is ready? And all you have to do is open your eyes. If 8 billion people on this planet are not together, how exactly is that going to work? Molad is Deus Hashem, and Lo Yesu Kol Elam Al Das Hashem Bilvad. It's talking about Umas Elam. So how exactly do you explain the two? I've asked this to people. So they say, it'll be a miracle. I said, a miracle? The Rebbe said a miracle? The Rebbe's Fedish, not a miracle. A miracle, in other words, Mashiach comes right now, and then what's going to happen with the 8 billion? It's a miracle. The Rebbe never said that. The opposite. The Rebbe said today you can talk to Umas Elam about Shav Mitzvah. Once upon a time you couldn't. That's why the Rambam was not implemented, because it wasn't possible. So what am I saying from all of this is, I happen to push it because I wrote Torah Meaning for Life, and I deal with a lot of non-Jews. So I had to research what the Rebbe's approach was. It wasn't just theoretical for me. I remember when I wrote Torah Meaning for Life, I went to Rabbi Yale, and I asked him, I said, I'm writing a book. It's going to be published by a Goyish publisher, and a lot of non-Jews are going to read it. And how do I write it? Because the Rebbe speaks Torah mitzvahs is definitely not for them. On the other hand, how could I write a book that don't mention Torah mitzvahs? So Biel told me, it's like giving a shir. You're giving a shir to a group of Jews, and a non-Jew walks in. So he's listening in. So I said, but that's not the case, the Fierce Fakert. I'm writing it in a place where there's more non-Jews. It's not a shir. So then he told me, he said to me, I have no nisayon, I have no experience with this, I have no idea. I have no clue, he told me. And I asked a lot of people, I remember, and I was struggling with this, because I didn't know what would be the approach. I finally found my answer, actually, because I wanted an answer from the Rebbe, not my own theories. A few sikhs the Rebbe speaks about Yud Beis Tammuz Mem Aleph, and I think Chofov Mem Hey, were both televised Farbrengens. So I chapzich, a televised Farbrengen, by the Rebbe meant he's talking to the world. Even though he spoke in Yiddish and Lashon HaTorah, but many times you'll see, and I started listening to these Farbrengen, and I see the same teichen, same ideas, but you could see it's a signal, a different signal. And here I found two things. Here's, listen to this one. Yud Beis Tammuz Mem Aleph. The first Sikha, the Rebbe tells the story that Friedrich Rebbe sat in many, it wasn't in Meiser one time, I think a few times. First time he was a child. They threw him into a prison, it was dark, and there was a kelbel there was some type of calf, an animal, and he got scared because the calf was making noises, until he realized, and the Rebbe learned the whole lesson, that the calf is the Nefesh HaBamis. The Rebbe is Nefesh HaLekis. But they come together in one body. So sometimes you can get scared from the Nefesh HaBamis because it makes a lot of noise and it's very powerful. So you have to realize that was the Tech. Second Sikha, I think, the Rebbe says, wie kommt man reden wegen dem, red doch zu der Welt. Und sie no Nefesh Hashem is B'Yisrael. He's asking the question himself, how is he speaking about this thing, Nefesh Lekis, Nefesh Abamis, Memeret to the Welt? And the Rebbe answers that the Pasuk state in Kehelis, Ruach HaOdam El L'mayla, Ruach HaBehem Yeredes L'mata. So everybody, every Imus Ha'olam also have Me'ain, the two. You probably never heard this before, right? People are shocked when they hear that. I'm not saying the Alter Rebbe still says Nefesh Hashem is B'Yisrael. The Rebbe wasn't shale of that. Still Chelik of that. But Me'ain, there is a bow, which makes sense because then you can expect a non-Jew, if he's not accountable, if he's no choice, he has choice. It's a different choice. I can go on and on, but there's hundreds of sikhs in those years. I told people that I once collected all the sikhs of the Rebbe Hashem and Mrs. Ben Neach from Tafshin Lametes till Tafshin Nun. 800 pages. Not adapted. 800 pages straight from Hanachas. You know what 800 pages is? It's like 4 books. Only the sikhs from those 10 years. So you see, a tremendous kach. Now, the Rebbe is ahead of his time, big time, because most of us have no clue. I can't tell you how many shluchim. I have no idea how to deal with non-Jews. Yeah, of course I'll be nice and this, and I'll give them your book. That's what people tell me. Okay. And I'm not... The Rebbe did not want us to alter the shlichus. He didn't say open up. He befeded for Shale to open up Sheva Mrs. B'nei departments. But I really believe that this is part of the Rebbe's mission, directives, that have really almost nothing been done. I can't say nothing, I can tell you, I know doctors that have 7 copies of my book. Because everybody that goes to surgery for them gives them the book, like that. But, I mean... And I'm just speaking. If you want to really understand the Rebbe's approach to Goyim today, and how does it stem with Perek Aleph of Tanya, so you can write this down. Look it up. Go when you get home. Look up Likutei Sichos, volume Chelik Yud Gimel, page 230. I know by heart.
Can you repeat the citation again, please?
I remember the Rebbe Sichos. I don't remember my own.
The citation you gave.
Likutei Sichos, volume 13, page 230. It's a letter, Yud Beis Tammuz letter, and he quotes the Rebbe, the Sofil Cheshmita V'Yevel from the Rambam, where it says, Lo Shevet Levi Bilvad, famous Rambam, not Shevet Levi alone, Elo Kol Ish V'ish Meboy Elam, Ashanod V'Ruchei, every person who dedicates his spirit, his life, and goes on the whole thing and separates himself from the world. You know what Lashon there is? Harizem Eskadish Kiddush Kadosh. And the Rebbe has long ha'aris where he brings everything. That's Chsidum Se'elam from Rabbi Hill in the name of the Alter Rebbe. Perek Aleph is not Chsidum Se'elam because they come from Klippas Nega, and a bunch of other sources. Now, I was asked recently, because I said this a few times by Rabbi, to be able to reconcile that the world is ready and not have to go through some tremendous miracle or tremendous genocide, which the Rebbe Shel, like I said, from Shalach Mem Gimel, Mishpatim Mem Gimel, you have to say that the Rebbe holds that Reiv Umas Elam, Ruben Kakulam are definitely Chsidu Meselim or Bekeach Chsidu Meselim. Possible? Yeah. You have to say that. I don't see any way around that, or else you can't. Or else it doesn't work. Now, someone asked me recently, where do you get that from? I get it. I mean, look, the Rebbe called America Malchus HaChesed hundreds of times. What does that mean? Malchus HaChesed. Not talking about. Again, we're not talking about yechidim individuals. Of course, we know there's anti-Semitism. We know that there's danger and there's lurk in this. But at the Klol Sa'ila. And the same thing, Taki, you could say, Lahavdil by Eden. Most Eden are not Shem Neter Mitzvahs either. So Tinu Shenishbor, or they're B'kayach. The point I want to make is that it's not taking away from Ate V'chatanu. It's not taking away any of that. If you learn Chassidus, Umas Sa'elam at their best, they're Mamala Kalaman, which is pretty, that's all the course. You know, like I tell a lot of people, if every Jew kept the Shem Mitzvahs B'nei Neach, we'd have Mashiach here. What do you think? It's basically the Aseret Sadibris without Kibbur Dav and Shabbos. You know, just cover. So it's not the, you know, we have 613, they got 7, you throw them 7. First of all, that Amen, everyone says the 7 breaks down to 30 and 30 to 90. It's more complicated. It's consistent. I can give you another 20 sikhs where you see the Rebbe doing this. You know the story of the Ribbus, right? So what does it say? It's a mitzvah malva b'ribbus, right? Which again, for many, is a great proof that we have to discriminate, right? What does the Rebbe explain? The Rebbe asks a question in the Mems. I don't remember when it was, Rambam, I think. The Rebbe asks, why is it osir? Why should the ribbus be osir? If you sell someone, the Rebbe didn't give this dogma. You sell someone a product, you pay $10, you sell it for $12. There's no problem with that, right? So cash is valuable. You want my cash now? For that luxury, pay me $12 for $10. What's the? We're not talking about high interest, usurers that are charging the place exorbitant interest. It's the same idea. So the Rebbe says, because it says achicha. It's taka in halacha gufa. The Rebbe called it lefnim meshur sadin. It's not lefnim meshur sadin alpidin. But in other words, achicha. That taka you're going beyond alpi seichel. There's no problem with it. That's why malva b'ribus and thumas elam. Why not? I mean, it's like any benefit. But with your brother, meaning ayid with ayid, you have to go. You have to do more vasisa satev. I remember all the lashenas. What it's the same likud. There's the sich chelik tazvov. Well, it's a mitzvah because you can be. It's the same mitzvah to take $12 for a pair of shoes. No, I'm saying mitzvah meaning the mitzvah is not to rip them off. It means it's yeah. That's what it's not. This is the Rebbe saying. I later saw him first that others say it also. This is Bavusta. Okay, yeah, same word. Here, there's the Siche Akum Sheshavas. Chelik Tazvov, Noyach. Chelik Tazvov, the Rebbe asks, Akum Sheshavas Chayiv Nissen. So the whole thing there, whether he Shavas Shabbos or Sunday, whatever it is. The Rebbe asks why. What's wrong? The Chinuch says that Mitzvah Shabbos is Kedei Lisker there's a Be'er Elam. So why? Umas Elam don't need to know there's a Be'er Elam. Why is there Osir Shabbos? So the Rebbe's answer is very again. He says, because what says Odom lo Amul Yovoled? The Shabbos is Tzara. What says to take off a day? It's opposite of your tachlis. Ayid is Mamshach Sever Kalam, that's L'mayla Ma'elam. So Umas Elam is Elam, Elikuz Be'elam. And just some thoughts on this. But more importantly, so, as I said, we can't not talk about this. So what are we going to do? Insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. That's my line when it comes to Mashiach. People tell me all kinds of stuff. I said, well, figure out what the last 28 years wasn't done. You're going to do the same thing, you're going to have the same results. Obviously, the Eibishter could have Rachmanis, the Rebbe could have Rachmanis, and things can open up. We're talking about from our end. So I'm speaking now. I'm speaking to myself. Well, I'm speaking. Every Farbrengen, you speak to yourself like you speak to everyone. This is a major. This is a major issue. Major issue. That I'm leaving for you guys. Now I move on. Okay.
That's been done also.
Yeah, that's also been done. Exactly. Passing the buck. The answer is, I can tell you what my answer is. But I don't think there's one answer. The Rebbe would have had one answer. He would have said it. He said tut als, which meant clearly there's many things that could be done. You know, teaching children to nekesh beis rabim, mashiche, shlichus bechlal is obviously futzman chutza. These we all know are proven. We're talking about the addition. I look at it from my perspective because I'm involved with larger audiences and a little more the secular world and the non-Jewish world. I see it there, that it comes down to making some tremendous global noise that becomes that some way Chassidus, Mashiach, the message becomes a household name in the whole world. That's where I'm working on. That's personally me. Because I think that b'derech hateva, and it's doable today because of technology. It was not doable 30 years ago. It would be billions of dollars to get a video that reaches everybody. Impossible. B'derech hateva. So that is something I think is b'derech hateva possible. Yeah. Or why don't we get someone who knows Chinese to teach, and we teach him what to teach? That'll be faster.
It's a big question today, but you get your Gemara and Chassidus, and I can come to the classes. There's a lot of people who come to the classes today. So it's like you say, there's a shir and there's another guy on Zoom. But sometimes half the class can come.
Okay. So first, I'm very liberal when it comes to this personally. Yeah, I said, someone debated with me the other day. Is coming to me, tells me, "You said that you can teach Chassidus to non-Jews." I said, "Yeah, which part of Chassidus can't you teach to non-Jews?" He said, "Like where do you stop in Shaykh Adamun exactly? Like what? The pay the gimel? What? Where do you stop?" And what? He wants to know about God. She says, "You only teach about Mamal Kalam." I said, "What are you kidding me? Something?" And if he's a smart guy and he says, "So God is only." Is there nothing greater about? See, so there's also perception that Goyim just don't get. I said, what Chassidus says. I to me, any Chassidus can be taught to non-Jews. The real Akum Shalom. First of all, the Gemara says Akum Shalom Ateda is kenichnes lefnei lefnim. So Rashi says b'sheva mitzvahs didhu. To go learn with him Hilchos Shabbos. Film. There's no Indian in that. But to learn, let's say, some laws of morality or this, and you look at Gemara. Then I saw, by the way, Chafav Memhei, the Rebbe does say that the idea is even mitzvahs like film, Shibud Alev Ameich, you could explain. So not the mitzvah, but the concept. So people are makbid on this, and they're going to go crazy like this. It doesn't make any sense. Between us, lahavdil, most Eden are shaykh to Chassidus as much as Nishti in their ideas. Not talking about neshama again, I've met non-Jews that are so spiritual, it's envious. They're extremely spiritual. I'm sure I meet people like this all the time. And they're shaykh, completely shaykh. I teach us Shir 9 Beis every morning. There are non-Jews on it. What are we going to go do? First of all, I don't mind. It doesn't bother me. I can go start, if they can get it, isn't that hate, And what means Molod is Deis Hashem K'man L'chos Ma'achosim at the end of the day also? Look. Okay, but it means they're capable. Definitely the psychology of Chassidus. This is topics I talk about a lot. Let's say, the advice of Chassidus, apply Chassidus on Shalom Bayis, on dealing with anger, dealing with abuse. There's almost nothing in it it's for everybody. That's completely universal. Depends what you're. So extracting the wisdom of Torah, the Chochmas HaChaim of Torah, why send them to to secular sources. The Torah has plenty to say. There I don't see any issue at all. And it could help. It could help someone. I think, look, the fact is most of us, we have a Golos mentality. We're still thinking about the world as through the eyes of Golos. And it's a different, and the Rebbe definitely had a different look. For sure, a major thing. So that's on one end. But there's other ends. Listen, I think any shliach, if you have anyone in your city, I think I've said this number. I once spoke by the Kiddush Shluchim about it. If you have anyone in your city that's like a global business person, deals with a big scale, these are people you can talk about Mashiach easily. Because they talk to them in the language, how do we make a movement out of Sinai, so to speak, of the morals of how would you do it as I see no reason you can't talk to people on that level. That's what they do all the time. So I would definitely engage people like that. You never know what comes out of it. Most shluchim dealing with people at that level, all you want is a check from them. You don't want to talk hashkafa. But I don't think that's right. The Rebbe said, good business, and I think it'll help. If you have a kfir like that, or a person who's like a global guy, it'll help you because he'll see that he'll respect that you think big time, that the Rebbe had a big vision. Not taken away from your local Chabad house, but the vision is to change the world. People want to hear that. So I think that's a big thing that can be done. I mean, the Rebbe said more or less, as you're doing business with someone, you can't talk to them about God. And then, I don't know, the thing is, how do you get out of your comfort zone? Even a shliach. One shliach told me the trajectory of shlichus works like this. You go out on shlichus like this. Then you do that. Says, in the beginning, everything is, you're building excitement, and then you plateau. You start coasting. And you hope your children will do like the next. No, I mean, I understand, because derech hateva, how many times can you do lech lecha in your life? The Rebbe did that. So it is a challenge. But you guys are all young guys, so you haven't yet coasted.
No, that's what you do. You bring in young blood.
Yeah, I agree.
When you empower them.
Yeah, but a lot of the older guys don't want to, feel whatever it is.
I don't understand.
Doesn't make sense to me either, especially if it's your own children.
I mean, I do understand.
Because you get stuck in your ways, and then you think you know better than everybody, and you see a mistake.
It's not easy to bring in young people. Step back and let them do it.
I agree. You have to see it. Vayeshev Mem Aleph, the Rebbe said, "The Melech Malchus, I am Melech Malcham Lach." You have to. It's the art of delegation. The real good delegators will tell you, "I didn't compromise. I expanded." It's not like I gave up. I saw that if that person can do the job, I can do something bigger. It's the only way you do it, to see it that way. Control. Everybody wants control. But you're not the only guy here. There's other guys here. I think there was a regional Kiddush Shluchim in California years ago. Dennis Prager spoke. You were there. And he said something like this. I wasn't there. I heard about it. He said, Lubavitch was once the newcomers.
No, that's right. Yeah. You're now it.
You're the mainstream.
That's right.
Will you become corrupt? And I think a guy yelled out, "We're already corrupt." And he said like this. He said, when you came to America, so Chabad was the anti-establishment. Establishment was the Federation, the Reform, whatever. Now that you're going to become the mainstream, will you become a bureaucracy, basically?
He said allow others to. You can allow others to do it, and their thing. Right?
Yeah. So all the shluchim here are within the radius of what? 20 miles, 30 miles, 10 miles? 90? Where are you?
Modesto, it's very far. It's very far.
Oh, yeah?
It's in Sacramento.
90 miles? Where are you? Where are you? Hmm? 30? Which city? Where are you?
What part of San Francisco? Coal Valley?
Haight-Ashbury. It still exists?
Yeah.
It still has an element of that? Hmm?
The drugs and everything.
Yeah?
Unfortunately, it's like a tourist attraction now. So that's a preservation.
LA has a Sunset Strip.
Yeah, the big zone.
Same thing.
I haven't been there in a while, but it used to be when I went to law school. You heard about the Pew Research study?
Which one?
The past year or two, the Pew Research study said that the Chabad movement is, of course, the largest up-and-coming movement in American Judaism, and it has touched, there's a contact point between a Yid and a Chabad house. 37% of American Yidden have had a contact point with Chabad. It means they came to a service, or they went to a class, or whatever, and that makes it I think it makes it the biggest movement of American Judaism.
This is what Chabadniks love to hear.